And apologies in advance if trick-or-treaters come by.
Here we go. All right. This is what we do on a Wednesday night. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, striking up the live stream. This is what we do on Wednesday night, even when it's Halloween night. So Cam has already let us know that if the trick-or-treaters come by, he's going to go take care of business. So we can afford him that much for taking out his Halloween night for us. If I do, I'm on the second deck here, so they can only like throw stuff up at my window, I guess.
Oh, no.
I'm ill prepared.
I'm not going to, I don't have any candy or anything. So, and I actually don't even have my light on at the front door, but there's been a couple groups who came by anyway. So I was just saying, if they're knocking or anything, just kind of ignore that. But I'll be here.
I may get the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Fortunately, I'm down at the end of a road, so cul-de-sac. So I get a little less attention than others, and I'm at kind of the top of the hill, top of the mountain. So it takes a climb to get up here.
No, I'm right at the corner of a T intersection. So like I have two major streets like right there at the corner. So
your prime territory.
I mean, not major streets, but major in our neighborhood. So
sure.
Yeah.
All right. Want to remind everyone that we're here every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time, talking about college football with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. Also here all day Saturday with instant analysis. You can check us out at SG1 Sports. They have offered and need me to get over there on Fridays and Sundays, which is a good time. Same deal, live stream at noon Eastern time on Friday, and then the big weekend wrap up at 11 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday. All right, let's talk Miami. We got Cam Underwood on the line from State of the U, and boy, we expect it to be in better condition at this point, Cam. This Coastal Division race is, needless to say, up for grabs.
Yeah, and Miami's not even in the driver's seat of that competition, as it were. So, yeah, it's been rough for a couple of weeks here. So, and I mean, hopefully things change, but absent some changes, I don't see where things are going to change. I mean, Mark Richt can talk about execution needing to get better and things like that, but when you keep playing players who are making mistakes, playing players who don't have the athletic ability that you need, especially at key positions like quarterback. It's just hard to believe that things are going to get better. I mean, Bud Elliott, one of my SB Nation colleagues, he wrote a piece before the year about over-under bets based on regular season win totals. And there's some teams who are over already, and there's some teams that are under already by the number of losses they have, and Miami being one of those teams, along with who else is in that boat? Actually,
TCU comes to mind. I think TCU's 3-5 right now.
Yeah, I think that they're under also. I know. Oh, here it is. Yeah, so Louisville is already under their year win total or win loss. Miami, USC, Washington, and Wisconsin. So all of those teams you talk about having been, underachieving already. And I mean, like I said, based upon their preseason win totals, they're already under. Like they've lost more games than the betting line would have said. So if you bet the under on, those 5 teams I just named, awesome, good for you. You got some money. But, for those of us who, follow and root for those teams, that's not a good thing. And Miami's in that kind of spot. Miami already has a couple ACC losses back to back, which is bad. And so Virginia and Pittsburgh, they are in the driver's seat of the Coastal Division. I think they have a game coming up either this week or next, but that's going to put one team in first place. And I mean, either team can control their destiny. If they win out, then they win the division. And notice how neither name I just said was Miami. So yeah, this is going back and putting Miami in a situation that we've been in previous years. So if you're going back talking to Al Golden's time, or even talking about Mark Richt's first year 2 years ago, that's where Miami is in terms of this season, with being favored in every game. And we talked about that before the season. There's no reason that this should have happened. There's no reason Miami should have lost to Virginia or Boston College. And I know that those teams have scholarship players, and I know that, playing on the road is hard and blah, 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 blah. There's no reason Miami should have lost those games, period. And it just comes down to the fact that Miami's not doing what Miami needs to do. And I wrote that before the season, that, if Miami were to lose games, it was Miami beating themselves. And that's what we're doing. And Mark Richt continues to mortgage this season in the support of Malik Rozier, absent evidence of proper performance. And I'm not even going to say that everything is bad with Malik Rozier, because he started the Boston College game 9 for his first 11 with like 20 or 30 rushing yards and a touchdown in the first 2 drives. Yeah, the offense stalled on the first drive before Boston College scored. We came right back down and scored. So, things started well for Malik Rozier. But after that, he was like, what was it, like 10 for 25 or something for the rest of the game with 2 interceptions? That's not good enough. When you get shut out in the second half, and at the end of the third quarter, Miami is on the 9-yard line. You come into the fourth quarter, 1st and goal on the 9, and you don't score at all. 0 points. That's unacceptable. That's not good enough. So Miami is in a place, and I don't like being here. I don't like losing. Like, I really hate losing. And from a blogging perspective, like, I was blogging and then took over as managing editor through like Al Golden's last year at Miami. Like, I've been here, not just in the stands, but like on the internet, like tweeting and writing and running a website and things like that. And I desired those times to be behind us, because let me tell you, friends, it is hard to come up with content when you have a very, very bad team. And this is where Miami is going. So yeah, I mean, there is the potential for a 3-way tie in the Coastal Division, where Miami could go to the ACC championship game. There's a lot of things that need to happen. But the very first part of any kind of scenario for Miami to even have a shot at getting to the ACC championship game is Miami needs to win all the rest of the games. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen, because this team is not performing to the level that it needs to and is wasting a very good championship caliber defense by intentionally fielding an atrocious offense. And it is unacceptable. I do not like it. And that's where we are.
So many ways to go here. The first thing I'm going to set everyone up on, as we have tons of people now getting into the chat room and online here, is that so I'm going to be here for a couple hours. We're going to talk about, as I reviewed it, the Week 10 schedule. This is the best schedule of college football. It is unbelievable how many conference and playoff impactful games there are this week. So we'll get to all the games. We're bringing on more people, and DJ Durkin got fired at Maryland today as well. We're focused on Miami and Duke and Cam. Yeah. So Virginia and Pitt, that does not sound like a division leading type game in November, but that is the game, and that's this Friday. So I'm going to need to settle in and focus on that one. Man, when I looked at Miami preseason, I picked the Canes to go 10-2. And when I was pushed by people when they weren't good enough with 10-2, when they said, which 2 are they going to lose? I said, okay, I'm going probably Florida State, Boston College, or I'm going. I actually took off of Florida State because that game was at home. I went Boston College in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech. But now, yeah, all the games, if you took the names and the recruiting rankings and everything you know about the talent on the roster and just went by the way the teams are playing and looked at Miami's stretch run, they all seem like toss-ups.
Yeah, and that's emblematic of Miami underperforming. Like, that's why they are toss-ups, or at this point. Again, Miami has more talent than the teams that they're playing. Miami should be a better team. Miami has flashed. I mean, but then again, they flashed potential against, Group of 5 and FCS teams. I mean, Miami is 2-6 in their last 8 games against Power 5 competition. That's the last 3 games of this year. That's LSU, or last year, excuse me. That's losing to LSU. That's beating Florida State. Awesome, great, good, glorious. And beating, who was that? North Carolina, who's abjectly terrible. So 2 of the worst teams in the conference are the only 2 FBS team or Power 5 teams, excuse me, that Miami's beaten in the last 8 games. This is not a thing that has recently popped up. I spoke about this last year. There were issues, there were underlying problems that Miami, it seems to me that the Miami program and staff, and definitely the fans, overlooked intentionally, because by smoke and mirrors, Miami won 10 games in a row last year. But I was being very critical then and saying that luck is going to run out. These things are going to come back, and these offensive issues are going to be problematic. And that is what's been seen throughout the end of last year and then this year. And yeah, it's not good.
So, Cam, you alluded right off the top to making poor choices in regards to not playing the best players. And of course, you're talking quarterback, and you included quarterback. So this is what continues to boggle my mind is that it's not only based on a non-coach watching the games, and I've seen, take out Savannah State in about half against Toledo. I've seen pretty much everything else. And it's not necessarily just that N'Kosi Perry, sure, he's made his mistakes. He looked awful in the first half against Virginia. Not only does he look like the better player today, although it's arguable, but he's definitely got the most upside. And then number 3, he's the future quarterback. You're talking about a guy playing at so wouldn't you want to put your future in play on the field, but also build up his confidence and make him feel like you trust him?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree that he's the quarterback of the future, honestly. Okay. Just because of the way that Mark Richt is treating him. You know what I'm saying? Like that. Yeah. I do believe he has more talent. I think that Jaron Williams obviously has more talent than Malik Rozier, but we're so deep in the season that if you wait, what is it, a week? 2 weeks, excuse me. If you wait 2 more games, then you can play Jaron Williams for the rest of the season and maintain his red shirt. That would be Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, and a bowl game. Assuming that Miami does not get to the ACC championship game. If Miami does, then you have that 4th game thing where he could play in the ACC championship game or bowl game, but then it would be one or the other. So if you wait to play Jaron Williams, who's very talented, but you could see in the spring that the game was just a half step too fast for him. Yeah, but I mean, it continues to boggle my mind why and how Mark Richt is so singularly supportive of Malik Rozier. It just doesn't make sense. And I know that N'Kosi Perry had that video on social media of him holding money during the bye week when he went home to Ocala and whatever. Yeah, fine. Okay, cool. But I've said this in other places. 19-year-olds are stupid. I mean, if you think back, Mark, to when you were 19, if I think back to when I was 19 and a freshman at the University of Miami, I did stupid stuff. And I have a story I want to tell, but I shouldn't tell it, so I'm not going to. But there's a very specific thing that I did.
Clean version? No? Nothing? Okay.
I climbed on top of a building that I was not supposed to climb on top of. That was very precarious for me to get to the top of this building. Like, I could have lost my life doing what I did. I mean, it was very stupid. It was very unintelligent. And I did it multiple times because I was 19 and 19-year-olds are stupid. And N'Kosi Perry's 19 and you're stupid. Like 19-year-olds do 19-year-old stupid stuff. But then to not play him doesn't make sense to me. And then, but also at the same time, say that he's a member in good standing and he's not being punished and he's not being benched because of off the field things. So then if you're not talking about the off the field stuff, then it has to be the on the field stuff. But the on the field stuff, you only gave him 4 drives at Virginia. And you said before that you thought about taking him out after the first half against Florida State. Now, that first half against Florida State was bad. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you should have 100%. But you did not. And you gave him that support, and then he validated that by coming in with 3 touchdown passes in the second half, winning that game and things like that. And the first thing that you think of the next week is, when can I pull this kid out of the game? Like, what are you doing? Like, what does Malik Rozier, what has he done to engender such a feeling of support? You know what I mean? Like, that seems to be singular to him. And he doesn't have the range. He doesn't have the talent. He doesn't have the ability. And you're seeing teams have schemed up how to stop him. And then Mark Richt has had to truncate the offensive scheme because Malik Rozier's inability to make throws. Case in point, first half, I want to say. I think it was maybe second quarter. Anyways, first half, I believe, against Virginia. 3rd down and forever. You send Jeff Thomas on a go route. They're in cover 2, so you get behind the cornerback and in front of the safety, so you get that cover 2 window up the corner or up the sideline, and he's wide open. He's open by 15 yards. Malik Rozier throws the ball, and it's 10 yards underthrown, so Jeff Thomas tries to throttle down from whatever speed he's running at, 22, 23 miles an hour, which is ridiculously fast, and then he falls because he's trying, and he's going from 7th gear to try to stop, and then literally, I mean, the ball was nowhere close. And the defenders fought each other for the interception, which was gifted to them, and they dropped it. And the radio call from Miami on, the radio station said, oh, well, the pass is incomplete because the receiver slipped. The receiver slipped because the quarterback threw the ball so short because the quarterback couldn't get the ball there. Yet and still, Mark Richt fully supports this guy to play at the expense of the team and at the expense of these games, and it does not make sense. That last interception that Malik Rozier threw at Boston College was... it wasn't the worst I've ever seen, because I saw that one in the bowl game against Wisconsin where he threw it directly to the defensive end who was standing 4 yards in front of him. But the point was, everybody knew what the play was. We're sitting on Twitter. I was tweeting and other people were adding me. 3rd down and 9. What are we going to run? Slant, 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 slant. Look, I know that I'm not a football coach. I know that a lot of people who were with me tweeting on, Friday evening were not football coaches. Yet and still, we all to a person, male, female, otherwise, old, young, doesn't matter. Everybody knew that we were running a slant. Guess who else knew that we were running a slant? Boston College. So you drive on that ball, you jump that route, and you get the interception because you know that he's not going to throw the ball long because he does not have the athletic ability. That's like putting me out there and trying to have a 70-yard throw. I mean, do I want to think that I can make that throw? Yes. Can I actually make that throw? Probably not. So you're not going to have me try to make that throw. So you're going to do things where I can do, and make those throws. And it's a problem if you're taking me at my age and athletic ability, which, I have athletic ability, but I was not a scholarship quarterback. I don't have the strongest arm in the world. But if I can make a reasonable comparison to me making a throw and Malik Rozier making a throw in a game, that's a problem. And you see that going on and on and on over and over again. So I still question how Mark Richt is so singularly supportive of Malik Rozier at the expense of everyone else on this roster. You think that Gerald Willis doesn't deserve to have a quarterback with the ability to make plays? You think that John Garvin doesn't deserve that? Shaq Quarterman, Mike Pinckney, Jaquan Johnson, Michael Jackson, these guys, Trajan Bandy, these guys on the other side of the ball who are playing on this awesome, amazing top-tier defense, you think they don't deserve that? You think Jeff Thomas doesn't deserve having better, more catchable balls? And I know that Jeff Thomas has been targeted a million times, but, when some of those throws are inaccurate, does it really matter? And a couple of the catches that he's had this season, and you've seen them, are highlight reel catches because he had to adjust and make these great things happen when the ball was not where it needed to be. I don't understand it. And we've seen Miami already lose these games. And honestly, Miami's going to lose another game this year. And I'm just putting it out there. Do I want that to happen? No. I don't have any evidence based upon the play at the most important position on the field or in general on offense. Because, look, if you want to extend that out and say, Cam, you're being too singular about Malik Rozier, fine. Let's talk about the offensive line. Let's talk about the run game averaging under 3 yards a carry. Let's talk about 2 games where we scored 27 total points. That's 13.5 points per game. Let's talk about all of those kind of things. Let's talk about all of those issues. Let's talk about 3rd downs. Let's talk about 3rd down and 4th down in the Virginia game where Miami goes I formation. And if you run I formation at Miami or have this season, what's the one play that we've run? Fullback dive to Trayon Gray. No, sorry. There was one time, and I asked, and I looked, and I'm trying to go back through the play-by-play. There's one play out of I formation that has not been fullback dive. One, the entire season from lining up in that formation. So you think that the opposition doesn't know what you're going to run there? You don't get it on 3rd down. Okay, cool. We're going to line up in heavy I formation again on 4th down, give it back to Trayon Gray and see what happens. Turnover on downs, boom. There are big problems, and people are overlooking them. And by people, I mean Mark Richt. And changes are not happening, and the result is not what it needs to be. So it's frustrating and it's problematic. And I think that, things need to change for Miami to be successful. I want them to change. I want to be successful. I want to have a 10-game win streak like last year. However, absent any changes, and Mark Richt has come out repeatedly and said that there are not going to be changes, I struggle to see where the product and the result is going to change and improve.
Yeah, and the Jeff Thomas throw in particular, that was, if you didn't have a rooting interest, a bit comical because I sat here after the game and did instant analysis and took calls, and I was saying that ball needed to be out, up the field, down the sideline,
all the way to the end zone,
the back corner of the end zone.
Brody, let him go get it. God.
Yeah, Jeff Thomas was like, I got to get back there.
Right. I mean, like I said, it's the Randy Moss. Hey, chuck it up there, dog. Just throw it and let him go run. He's a thoroughbred horse. And you put him outside finally, so he's playing Z receiver, gets up the sideline, and yet chuck it. Go, send it, and I will go get that ball. But then you throw it. It's just, I just don't. The best Malik Rozier we ever saw was 3 years ago tonight at Duke, his very first start in the game with Corn Elder's iconic return, where Miami should have won anyway before that because the referees were terrible and called an ACC record 23 penalties against Miami and very many phantom calls and things like that. And that was the high water mark, honestly, for Malik Rozier. Past that, is never been that good of a performance since then. And he'll make a throw here and there, but man, it handicaps the team. And the points that I was making last year have been exacerbated because now that L column has 3 in there already in the regular season with games to go. Last year, the 3 in the L column came at the end of the season. So at this point, we were still undefeated. Okay, cool. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. But it just, yeah, I don't know. And, Mark Richt is quintupling down. He did it on the radio. He's done it in press conferences. He's done it media availabilities and teleconferences and things like that. He's saying that lineup changes are probably not going to change. Well, definitely not going to change because he keeps continuing to name Malik Rozier the starting quarterback for every week and saying that the scheme is not going to change because we're running plays that have worked for 30 years. Well, Mark, if everybody knows that it's going to be inside zone, that play is not going to work. If everybody knows it's going to be a slant, that play is not going to work. So please do something different. Please do something different because insanity is defined as doing the same thing, expecting the result to change. And I feel like you're driving me insane, Mark Richt. So don't do that. Change something, please.
We've got Cam Underwood on the line from State of the U. Miami taking on Duke. It's an ESPN2 game, 7 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday night. And yes, Pitt, Virginia. That right now is the game of the year in the Coastal Division in the ACC. The winner of that game, don't look at the overall records, especially in the case of Pitt. They have lost 4 games. They have been annihilated by the likes of Penn State, Notre Dame, and Central Florida outside the conference. That doesn't mean anything. They have 1 loss in the ACC. Those 2 teams are playing for control of the division. Inexplicably, that's the way it is. First week of November, none of us projected that. The thing I will say, Cam, to get away from that particular subject matter for Miami and going to the defense is the Virginia game. Okay, you understand. I'm watching these just for the joy of watching football and the analysis and, no rooting interest.
Fair.
The Virginia game, sloppy game, just an ugly game. Boston College, those first 3 drives, they were executing to a T. They looked good. They looked sharp. And sure, the Miami defense thwarted them the rest of the game, but I didn't know if that was so much BC doing their typical, okay, we got a 1-2 score lead, 10 to 14 points the rest of the game, we're going to pack it in, or that was Miami just playing better on defense. It was probably some combination, but the Miami defense did not look good those first 3 drives of the game.
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 drives, they did come out touchdown, field goal, 17 points on the first 3 drives. But after that, it was punt, 3 and out, punt, a field goal on a 9-yard drive. So that was after interception, a touchdown on a 1-play drive after the second interception, which was a 14-yard play. They threw their own interception, field goal, punt, and then half. Miami did what they needed to do after the first, you make adjustments and you figure out, okay, cool, we're going to, lock things down. So yeah, the early game performance of the defense did not meet estimation, but Manny Diaz has been very good at making adjustments as games have gone on in his tenure here. So he was able to do that. So yeah, I'm still very pleased with the defense, and I'm not gonna really harp on them or anything. Like, could it have been better? Yes. Obviously, you want to pitch a shutout every day. That didn't happen. Excuse me, but you didn't get any real support from the offense either, so I mean, there were times, like I said, 1st and goal on the 9-yard line to start the 4th quarter, Miami comes away with 0 points when you're down by 2 scores and things like that. So I mean, there could have been other things, like if Miami scores there and then gets a 3 and out or gets a stop and gets the ball back, now you're talking about your 6-point game, 27-21 going in. So I mean, yeah, the defense was not perfect, but the defense did well, I do believe. Obviously, it could have been better. Giving up 149 yards to A.J. Dillon was not great, definitely. And then, his backup had 7 carries for 41 as well, because, they have 2 250-pound running backs on their team. So between those 2 guys, they had 190 yards. So, yeah, that was definitely not something that met my estimation of goodness, of greatness from Miami's defense. But overall, I'm still very pleased with the defense. And even if you want to say that Miami's defense cost them this game, that makes 1 for the year. So, fine. And, going undefeated is very hard. So even if that was the 1 loss, all right. But yeah, I'm still very pleased with the defense. I think that everybody's playing hard. I think that, we're seeing progression from guys that we needed to see progression from. Scott Patchen, finally healthy, is a 2nd-team defensive end now. I already named a bunch of starters, Shaq Quarterman, Michael Pinckney. Romeo Finley has been a revelation at the striker position. John Garvin, Gerald Willis III, who's going to be, a high 2nd, maybe 1st-round draft pick now. Joe Jackson, Pat Bethel, even, other guys in the secondary, Trajan Bandy, Jaquan Johnson, Michael Jackson, all kinds of guys. So, Miami's defense has really, stepped up to the task this year, and they're doing well. So, yeah, it did let down a little bit early on in the game, but I don't think that it really cost Miami the game. But even if you want to make the statement that it did, that's one game out of the season, and costing Miami a game was giving up 17 points in the first quarter or the first half against a team that Miami should have beaten. So improvement can be seen everywhere.
Cam Underwood joining us from State of the U, the best in Miami football coverage. You got to join him and the rest of the crew right there as the Canes try to salvage the season coming up this Saturday night against Duke. Cam, before we let you go, I would like to get a recruiting update. And it did come to mind when you mentioned the interception on the slant that had they done their scouting, they also should have known that kid jumps on those routes. He leads the nation in interceptions. I believe that was a Hamp Cheevers interception from Boston College, and he is tied for the nation's lead in interceptions. So that's what he does.
I mean, yeah, but what are you going to do? You don't have the offensive line to block long enough to do a slant and go, a sluggo route. You're not going to throw a 9, a vertical route, or a post, whatever number, 8, or a flag for a 7. You're not going to throw those long vertical routes because you can't necessarily block, especially on a third down where you already have seen Zach Allen and I forget the name of the other defensive end for Boston College who really, owned the night.
Wyatt Ray.
Exactly. Right. So both of those guys are getting up the field in pass rush, and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that 100% they didn't know that, Hamp Cheevers likes to jump slants. But again, when you don't have a quarterback with the ability to make different throws, then you kind of have to throw what he can throw and get what you get. And we threw what he could throw and got what we got.
All right. So you do have some good news and some not so good news from the recruiting front over the last few weeks. So, that being your thing, and people love recruiting talk, so we'll finish with that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the time. I know you got a couple other people who are going to come on quickly. So if you want a full, 5,000 words on recruiting, I wrote this month's recruiting radar or the class breakdown. Got it in just under the radar right on Halloween on the 31st. So that's up on stateoftheu.com. 2 quick things. Number one, Cornelius Nunn, who's a safety out of Miami Palmetto High School. He completed his flip from Syracuse to Miami by committing to Miami a couple of weeks ago. So that was pretty awesome. He's a little underrated right now as a 3-star, but he's fast and he's physical. He's exactly what Miami looks for in the defensive secondary. So he's a guy who, he's probably not going to be a freshman All-American in his first year, but he will definitely be, or has the potential to be a solid player with Miami moving forward. That's the good news. The bad news is that Braylon Ingraham, who is a strong side defensive end / maybe a 4-3 defensive tackle, a penetrating tackle, he was a long time Miami lean, had even reportedly been telling Miami for a couple of months that he was going to be committing to Miami on his mother's birthday, which was the October 23rd was his commitment date. But he took a late visit to Alabama, and you know how those go. So he decided to commit to Alabama instead. And that kind of changes things because, if you get Ingraham in this class, you have 4 defensive tackles with, depth and talent. And obviously Miami needs depth and talent at that position. So, that's a positive if you get him, but we didn't. So now kind of back to the drawing board because Miami has 3 defensive tackles, one, and I don't even know which one is necessarily going to step in and play. You got Jason Munoz from St. Thomas Aquinas. You got Jalar Hawley from Buford, Georgia, and Stephen Blissett from Poly Prep in Brooklyn, New York, who's having a monster season, by the way. He's averaging like 10 yards a carry as a running back, and he has like 40 tackles and 6 sacks or something like that. So he's a good player, but I'm not sure any of those guys step in day one at Miami. But if you have Ingraham, who's a little bit bigger and a little bit more talented, maybe he can be in that rotation as well, but Ingraham's not coming. So, I talked about what some of the chatter is about where Miami can look at defensive end, defensive tackle in the rest of this class. And that is a position where Miami has struggled to recruit and a team against which Miami has struggled to recruit, Alabama, that being. And then there's a bunch of other information, like I said, this month's class breakdown. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but 5,000 words up there. And then we got more football stuff and basketball seasons starting up here as well. So we have our player profiles and coach previews and a whole season and game previews and all these kind of things about basketball as well. So, yeah, football obviously on this channel is the number one focus, but we do much more than just football over at stateoftheu.com. So if you're a Miami Hurricanes fan or if you're a hater and want to just kind of come in the comments and hate away, because we have plenty of those as well. What's up? What's his name? Jay Knoll, who's always in our comments, who's a Florida State fan. Awesome. Cool. But yeah, we try to do a lot of different things and bring you a lot of different content over at stateoftheu.com. So check it out.
So Cam, I try to keep you on here for like hours most of the time, but yeah, we've got a few other guests,
No
and
worries.
because of my master scheduling prowess, this is what we're left with. So I will let you get on with your Halloween night, and then I will apologize to my two guests, and I will try to figure out a better way to do this. But Cam, we appreciate the time as always, and you're always welcome to come on Mark Rogers TV, of course.
Yeah, definitely. So you guys have a great Halloween, Steve and Claire. I'm sure that you guys will do great work. So I'll see you guys around.
Thanks, Cam. That is Cam Underwood, of course. He gave you the rundown at State of the U. So what do we do here? So I'm going to make an explanation to everyone here that, okay, we got Claire Crawford on the line talking Ohio State football. We got Steve Helwig from Hustle Belt. He covers the MAC. We also bring him on to talk a little Texas football. So Texas, the MAC, it's usually a Texas football talk with Steve, and he joins us from the University of Texas. So what I've done, as you two well know, I believe I've explained it to you. My dilemma is when I slot guests every 15 or 30 minutes, and then I get cancellations, and then I get the note back to say, I can't make it at 8. Can I make it at 8:30? And this has just been my life for the last 5 years, is scheduling these things. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going on it live at 7 and just jump on, and I try to space them out, but I'm not that successful. So ladies first, or Steve actually was on the line first. Claire, are you okay to hang out for 15 minutes?
I sure am. If I'm listening to college football, I'm a happy little camper. I'm all charged up, and literally my phone is charged up, so we don't have to worry about me waiting for too long.
Well, thank you so much for your graciousness. And of course, you could step off the line if you'd like and jump back on. But we got Steve Helwig on the line from the campus station there at the University of Texas. You can also join him at the Daily Texan and covering MAC football with SB Nation as well at Hustle Belt. And there's not a whole lot that Steve doesn't do. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. As you probably know, it is MACtion season, which is one of the best times. We have football on every single day of the week. Pro football on Sundays and Mondays, and college football every single day from Tuesday to Saturday. What more could you ask for? We got some good games last night in the MAC, and we have another one, Ball State Toledo, that just kicked off 10 minutes ago.
So why don't we stay with the MACtion route here? We'll start with that because, yeah, there were two games on, one on ESPN2 last night, one on ESPNU, the 1-7 matchup there with my alma mater, Kent State, taking part. So the Buffalo Bills, I'm sorry, was going a little minor league baseball there, were on the A ticket there, the first ticket on the ESPN2 game there. So get us caught up for those of us who will catch more MAC football during postseason play and are geared up for the MAC championship game, most likely on that Friday night of championship weekend, and where we stand on the MAC race and what stood out to you.
All been about the Buffalo Bulls. They're one of 4 teams in the nation with 8 wins, as they got their 8th win last night against Miami, and it was a thriller. 51-42. The game was 42-42 late, just the teams trading touchdowns. And Buffalo has a very stacked team all around. Although last night was more of an offensive showcase, they have some talented individuals on that defense. For example, linebacker Khalil Hodge, not the first great Khalil to come out of Buffalo, one of the best tacklers in the country, always ranking in that top 10 in the tackles in the past couple of years. They have a couple good pass rushers. From Chuck Harris, outside linebacker James Patterson. Their defense has a lot of key pieces on there, but their offense is just something else. Wide receiver Anthony Johnson for Buffalo, we're going to see him on Sundays for sure. He actually had to make the decision last year whether he wanted to declare for the draft or return to the Bulls for a senior year. And he decided to return to the Bulls, and it looks like it's working out in both his favor and Buffalo's favor. Last night, he had 238 receiving yards on 8 receptions and 3 touchdowns. That was pretty incredible. And his quarterback, Tyree Jackson, 6'7" quarterback, one of the tallest in college football. He played an excellent game too. 3 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, a career high in passing yards. And Buffalo got the 51-42 victory at home over a a Miami, Ohio team that's a little inconsistent. Miami, Ohio's 3-6. Sometimes they'll get up for games. Sometimes it doesn't look as good. Miami's inconsistent, and they're probably not going to make a bowl this year with games against Ohio and NIU still looming on the schedule. But Buffalo is going to be – they're a win over Ohio away in the MAC championship game. And Ohio's really come up recently. They had a slow start to the year. Now Ohio's 5-3 and finally figuring out that offense. They get Western Michigan tomorrow. But Buffalo's schedule, it's with Kent State and Bowling Green, the two 1-7 teams that played last night, as two of Buffalo's 3 remaining games. 10 wins is a lock for the Bulls. It's can they go into Athens, Ohio, and beat the Bobcats? Ohio controls their own destiny right now because Ohio's only loss is to a MAC West team, NIU. So if Ohio wins out, they get that trip to Detroit. So Buffalo's entire schedule comes to whether they can beat Ohio or not. Or they could just rely on Ohio to lose to Western Michigan, and then they're in good shape and they pretty much lock it up already. But that is the biggest news right now on the MAC is Buffalo this season. They're already receiving an AP vote. Nation's starting to take notice. They had a nationally televised ESPN2 game last night. They won it, and the Bulls are just looking in great shape. Just one loss to Army, 42-13, a little ugly that day, but the Bulls have responded really well.
We got Steve Helwig on the line from Hustle Belt. It's the SB Nation platform for the MAC. That gets under-publicized, so you can join it right there. But, of course, as we know, the league has made a contract with ESPN for years, and on Tuesday and Wednesday night, they own college football. So if you want to watch college football on Tuesday and Wednesday night, it's got to be the MAC. Steve also joins us from the University of Texas. And, of course, the Longhorns coming off that stinging loss in Stillwater in which they got behind big, made a late rally, couldn't quite close the deal. Lost 38-35, I believe was the final score, 38-35. Yes, against the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. There's a 3-way tie currently for first place in the Big 12 and a huge game as it appears to be a round-robin scenario right now with West Virginia, Texas, and Oklahoma. Round 1 goes to Texas on a late field goal against Oklahoma. And, of course, Oklahoma and West Virginia will play the last game of the season. But this Saturday, in Austin, West Virginia, will Greer come to town? Set us up for that one, Steve. That should be huge.
It's huge. I mean, there's, 4 AP top 15 games this weekend from the 2 SEC games, and then Texas, West Virginia, on Michigan, Penn State. It is a stacked Saturday.
It's the best Saturday of college football so far this season. When I was looking at it, I just kept going to games that I wanted to see over and over and over. It's crazy.
Yeah, so it's a 2:30 kickoff in Austin, and Texas really needs a home game right now because their program, Vince Lombardi said it best, you can learn a line from a victory and a book from defeat, and I think Texas learned an entire Charles Dickens novel on last Saturday in that loss to Oklahoma State. 38-35 in Stillwater to an Oklahoma State team that just doesn't look like a typical Oklahoma State team this year. They lost a lot of senior talent last offseason. Mike Gundy's still manning that program, but they lost 31-12 to Kansas State. They got wrecked by Texas Tech at home at night. And Oklahoma State makes a statement win over Texas, and a lot of that was because they were able to establish a 31-14 lead early. And a lot of the criticism right now is on Tom Herman. Tom Herman suspended Texas cornerbacks, their starting cornerbacks Devontae Davis and Chris Boyd for the first quarter of that Oklahoma State game for being late to team functions. And it was pretty obvious how much Texas needed their cornerbacks because Oklahoma State wide receiver Tylan Wallace had 222 yards on 10 receptions and 2 touchdowns. He was dominant, but he was dominant when the cornerbacks were out of the game, and he was dominant when the cornerbacks were in the game. Texas couldn't stop them. Oklahoma State now is 5-3, just one game behind Texas in the overall record standings. So maybe the Cowboys in Texas are closer than we actually thought they were this year after that game. But I think 2 other things we learned about Texas this year are TCU and USC. If you saw those teams Saturday, TCU and USC are classified as ranked wins for Texas, but are those even quality wins anymore? TCU's 3-5 and became the first Big 12 team to lose to Kansas since Charlie Strong's Longhorns did in 2016. USC is a middling 4-4, getting shellacked by Utah. Then they lost at home to Arizona State, another middling 4-4 program. So now all Texas has really in their favor is that Oklahoma game. But the Longhorns still control their own destiny heading into West Virginia, and I think that's really important for the Longhorns to get back on track. They control their own destiny in the Big 12 because they have that key tiebreaker over Oklahoma. But if they lose their second Big 12 game to West Virginia, I think you can almost end their Big 12 title hope chances, because Oklahoma would probably beat West Virginia. I mean, that game could be a toss-up. Oklahoma's really looking like they're turning the corner right now, and that would be West Virginia's second conference loss. And with 2 conference losses apiece, West Virginia would get in over Texas. So this game is monumental for the Longhorns. Can they stop Will Grier? They couldn't stop Taylor Cornelius, and Taylor Cornelius didn't have a really good season up until last week. Can they stop Will Grier, who absolutely trounced Baylor last week in a 58-14 win? Will Grier, only Iowa State was able to contain him really this year. And I just don't know if Texas's defense can do it. Will Grier, he has David Sills the fifth, one of the best receivers at getting open in the nation, always in the end zone. He's always open in the end zone. Sills is always on those leaders for touchdown receptions of the nation. Texas's cornerbacks have to come back and have the game of their life against Grier, Sills, Gary Jennings, and the rest of that West Virginia passing offense. Now, offensively, Texas needs to have a better game from the running backs and both Sam Ehlinger alike. Ehlinger did play despite a shoulder injury, which marked him questionable for last game, and he now has thrown 210 passes without an interception, which is pretty good and still playing in Texas's favor. But Texas needs a better performance than a 22 for 42 from Ehlinger, and it was just an average offensive performance. The Longhorns didn't wake up until late in the game, and playing from behind, just like in the Maryland game, it came in to bite them again. But Texas can't afford to do any of that against West Virginia, who's a top 15 team, and with the best offense they've seen since Oklahoma.
We got Steve Helwig on the line. You can catch him either on SB Nation at Hustle Belt, where he covers MAC football, also at the University of Texas, where he works for the campus TV station there at the University of Texas, also the Daily Texan, covering Texas. And, of course, the Longhorns have a huge one against West Virginia, both teams with 1 loss in the conference. Of course, Texas dropped that one in game 1 against Maryland. So, Steve, you know what the narrative here is in regards to offensive and defensive strength. It's West Virginia's all offense, not much defense, and it's Texas all defense, not much offense. But that is way overblown, of course. Sam Ehlinger has developed his game immensely this year, and I've seen a lot of Texas football this year, not as much as you. I don't even watch the Tulsa games, but I watch the big games, and they played a whole lot of big games. So I've seen the TCU game, and I saw last week's game, and on and on and on, USC and Oklahoma as well. And Ehlinger is just such a better passer and decision maker. He's banged up, as you talked about. The running games come to life a little bit more so this year than it was deplorable last year. And he's been able to take advantage of the 2 threats that he has on the outside in Colin Johnson and Lil Jordan Humphrey. That's been a major difference. But the West Virginia defense isn't as bad as people think. It's actually pretty good, and the Texas offense better than it's been generally in recent years. So how do you shake this one up? How are you handicapping this one at this point?
I agree with both points you said. I think West Virginia's defense does get underlooked a lot. They have some good talent there. Outside linebacker David Long's very good leading that defense. And then Texas has Ehlinger, Ellinger's not the most consistent quarterback, but he can make good plays with his legs a lot, and sometimes in the passing game. He threw a beautiful deep ball last week to Andrew Beck, and sometimes he'll just make plays like that work really well in Texas's favor. But I'm thinking this game's going to be, I'll say, in the high 20s, maybe low 30s in terms of what we're going to see on the scoreboard in Austin on Saturday. I think it'll be a back and forth, and I think West Virginia wins this one by 1 possession. It's going to be an intense top 15 matchup, and I'm giving Texas about a few more points with the game being at DKR Stadium in Austin rather than in Morgantown. Texas did win this game last year in Morgantown, But Will Grier left the game with a key injury right as West Virginia was about to take the lead, never returned, and it was so obvious how important Will Grier was to the team, just watching that West Virginia offense for the rest of the game. Now with Will Grier, I think West Virginia has that game on their mind still. Dana Holgerson has that game on his mind still. And they're coming into Austin with fire. They realize that Iowa State game 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that they're still coming back from that. And they showed that vengeance last week against Baylor. I think they're going to try to show that against Texas.
Steve Helwig joining us from, again, the Daily Texan and the University of Texas campus TV station there, talking Longhorns and Mountaineers, a huge one in Austin on Saturday. And, of course, you can catch Steve as well covering MAC football at SB Nation's Hustle Belt. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy all the football this weekend.
Mm-hmm. You too. I'm going to head to action right now.
Absolutely. Just
you guys have a great Halloween.
Do that for us and the rest of the nation. All right, very good. We continue the parade through Mark Rogers TV tonight, and we stop with Claire Crawford talking some Ohio State football. Claire, how you doing tonight?
Happy Halloween, sir. How are you?
Happy Halloween. I jumped online early this morning because I got an idea from somebody, and I just talked about my favorite candy, my favorite Halloween candy, and some of the stuff that I didn't care for when I was a little kid, and you would go to the house and you would be disappointed because they would throw you an apple or some popcorn or something. It was all chocolate for me. And then to a lesser degree, the Sweet Tarts and the other stuff was okay when I got a little desperate near the end of the week, like a week from now when you're picking through the stale candy. But the chocolate up front was all right with me. But I had meant to stop by the store on my way home and maybe dress up a little bit for tonight. But I am so scatterbrained, Claire. I can't keep a thought in my mind for about 12 seconds. And, I was off to talking to people, going through all this stuff and preparing for the show. And boom, here I am. And then I sat down and thought, yeah, it's Halloween. And I forgot to do what I was going to do. So do you have any big plans tonight, or did you already take care of that?
I already took care of it. I'm being currently ignored by a teenager who won't send me pictures of her costume. So I know you know that life. And then I went to a Halloween party this past weekend where I had maybe the most clever costume I've ever had of all time. I'm not sure if you were able to see it. We had my other half and I had Kiss makeup on, and then we had striped shirts and little ties and berets, so we were French Kiss.
Oh,
it was clever.
Who gets the credit for that?
Right here.
Okay, I figured.
Yeah.
All right,
it was
Claire.
Great. And the Buckeyes have the chance to redeem themselves with me and many others on my birthday on Saturday as well. So I'm really truly putting all my happiness eggs into the Buckeye basket.
Well, absolutely. Happy birthday beforehand.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I know the game that everybody wants to forget that we're scarlet and gray was quite a while ago because they had a bye week last week. So I'm going to ask you this question, Claire. Is this game going to, on Halloween, this would be apropos, haunt the Buckeyes like that other game last year that everyone remembered the score to come college football playoff selection time against Iowa?
So this is how it could haunt the Buckeyes. If the Buckeyes do not prove that they have some sort of semblance of leadership on that team, offensively and defensively, that is the only way to recover from this. And with the incredible scandal and the back and forth with Zach Smith happening, before the season and leading up into Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer as head coach for 3 games, I truly believe that this team has the ability to overcome these type of obstacles. The way that we will find out if this team has any sort of semblance of leadership is for them to somehow surmount these obstacles that they've been put forth and not just recover from what the coaches are doing for them, the place that the coaches have put them in, but taking responsibility for their own actions, taking responsibility for what they can control, taking care of their business off the field, and moving forward. That is the only way. Shutting out everything that isn't Ohio State football and their academics right now, because it will poison them.
Claire, regardless of the results of this season, it's going to turn out, because it already has been, even if it's the rest of it's smooth sailing and nothing else jumps out at this team, either self-created or from the outside, it is about the strangest season ever in Columbus, from the Zach Smith scandal to Urban Meyer's latest health issues that have been released, to obviously another disparaging loss, and amidst all the accolades given to Dwayne Haskins, and rightfully so, and him possibly setting records, well, he already has school records for the season. He's well on his way to breaking all sorts of Big Ten records. There could be all sorts of highs and lows, and the biggest games have yet to be played. It's just a topsy-turvy season in most respects for a team that's 7-1.
So a game that I think is, again, as fans, we have the luxury of looking ahead, and a game that I think is going to have more importance than we might think as, again, fans, because we all assume that Ohio State and the coaching staff is not looking forward, but seeing how Texas is playing and watching the Big 12 unfold, that Maryland game, with Maryland topping Texas early on in the year, being a trap between Michigan State and Michigan, may be a bigger game than Ohio State might expect. Again, Ohio State has to win out. Ohio State has to have some sort of really dominant performance for the end of the season here, which I think they're entirely capable of doing despite that big loss to Purdue. I think that it may be more impactful as far as the playoff picture looks like.
We got Claire Crawford on the line talking Ohio State football. The Buckeyes back in action after a bye week, taking on Nebraska in Columbus. The Huskers are finally winning a couple games over Minnesota and Bethune-Cookman, as they made up for the Akron game that was wiped out in week 1. So I don't know how much that counts for, but Scott Frost certainly capable, and I think they will have better days at Nebraska, but scuffling at this point. But they do get the one win in the Big Ten against Minnesota, and did it much more impressively than the Buckeyes did against Minnesota the previous week, in winning 30-14, a game that was pretty close going into the fourth quarter. So we've talked about it prior to the Purdue game. We talked about it in those lackluster performances leading into Purdue. But the thing that strikes me about this team is that if there was one thing that we could point to, because every team has its flaws, and Alabama fans, even you do, but they're just not uncovered right now because you haven't played anyone. Every team has its flaws, and what has turned out to be the flaw of this team and other great teams, or really talented teams, let's separate the two. This is not a great team yet. Maybe they'll prove to be. They're not a great team. They're an extremely talented team. They're one of the 2 or 3 most talented teams in the country, is usually because the passing game has become so prolific across the country. There are tons of undermanned teams that have a guy that can throw it and a couple guys that can really catch it, and they give teams like Ohio State fits, because these quarterbacks and wide receivers, the level of skill and the level of play has risen remarkably in the last 15 to 20 years, because they are raised on passing camps, and they are so polished by the time they get there that you can have 5-star corners and they're still, having all sorts of issues, because those kids can pitch and catch, and that's what keeps some of these lesser teams in games. So that I could excuse, because you see that a lot out of some of the better teams in the nation, that they still have issues against great passing attacks. They kind of lose in coverage and that sort of thing. But running the ball, stopping the run, getting gashed on the ground defensively, plus through the air, there's multiple things to deal with here that It will be interesting, even if the final score is not interesting against Nebraska. This team should win somewhat handily, just to see if there's been any progress made in any of those departments.
Those are a lot of departments. And I think you're spot on with your analysis with so many of these teams being not just one-dimensional, but one-sided on that dimension as well. So Ohio State is guilty of it currently right now as well. I think it's another conversation for another day, but we live in a highlight era of sports in general. The Steph Currys of the world with their 3 points. It's difficult to think that doesn't have an impact on a player's mentality. So again, that's another conversation for another day, but I definitely think you opened the box talking about these passing camps and things like that. I know that the leadership at Ohio State from a coaching standpoint is better than that, but what they were working on throughout the week with 2 former 1,000-yard running backs with Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins is, really trying to figure out if it's an offensive line problem, if it's a offensive scheming problem, and how much responsibility did these very talented, as you mentioned, running backs actually have for this lack of actual running game. What we've seen is them really not be able to shed tackles. And it's apparently something that they did work on this week. So I expect to see that improvement. I expect to see a banged up team a little bit more healed. However, on the offensive side of the ball, Austin Mack is now out for the season with foot surgery. So we're going to see a guy like Ben Victor kind of step in literally into his shoes. And hopefully make an impact. I don't think those are that's a 1-for-1 conversion with Austin Mack and Ben Victor. Ben Victor had a very spotty spring practice. Urban Meyer mentioned in his press conference this week talking about the Nebraska game that Ben Victor was probably one of the most improved players on the team, and it's why he's getting a little more time. But I just think he has a long way to go as far as consistency is concerned. But he definitely has the potential for it. He's a big, tall, lanky wide receiver that Ohio State is now going to have to count on.
Claire, I'm going to hit you with at least one huge question off the live chat. This is an enormous one. It's a loaded question. But before I do, I've got to make mention of 2 comments that I've received. One was late last night or sometime today that I found rather humorous. And then another one from Coconut Kane just seconds ago. So Coconut Kane said that for Halloween, he's going to dress up as Mark Rogers, and he's going to hold a sign that says the top 25 that actually makes sense. That's something I release every Sunday, is the top 25 that actually makes sense. But I don't know that I want to see anybody dress up as me, because then I'll come to the realization, is that what I really look like? Yeah. And then today, somebody just commented. I've never seen a comment from this person, but they just commented, "How are you not famous?" And I thought that was nice. So anyway, back to Ohio State football, Claire. Somebody's asking here on the live chat. We know that from the time that the Zach Smith scandal came to a head and all that came down, and the discipline was handed to Urban Meyer, then the rumors came out considering the ramifications of that. The health certainly now adds to that. And then the Ryan Day performance during those 3 games. I'm being asked here, ask Claire, will Urban Meyer be back next year?
I don't think so. I think Urban Meyer wants to be back next year. I think Urban Meyer's plan as the Ohio State head coach is to coach as long as humanly possible. And I think that may be this year. From a couple articles that came out after Urban Meyer was asked in his press conference about his health, and then it just kept popping up as opposed to questions about the actual program. He decided to sit down with a few lucky reporters to give them some more in-depth information about his health, about the cyst in his brain that is not curable and is progressive. And he had surgery on it in 2014 to relieve some of the pressure from fluid and inflammation from this cyst. And 10 months later went on to win a national championship. So I know he knows he can overcome it, I'm sure. Whether he wants to continue overcoming it in the midst of all of the speculation and perhaps a mark on his legacy, whether you regard what happened with Zach Smith, whatever side you land on, there's a mark on his legacy, whether we like it or not. I believe that whatever he is feeling currently is genuine, whatever he is telling us, which is extremely personal. He doesn't have to tell us any of this. I'm sure it is, perking up the ears of Florida fans who went through something similar when Urban Meyer was going through health issues with his heart. And that was a little bit different of a situation, but not because of rumors, not because of any anecdotal evidence, just the way I feel, and knowing that I don't think the Zach Smith situation and Ohio State is done in the news cycle, unfortunately. I think that, again, Urban Meyer wants to be back next year. I don't think he will.
When you take into consideration the totality of, again, all these different events that pale in comparison to a Penn State situation, so I'm not likening it to that in that way, or Baylor, or from a football standpoint, the typical we cheated NCAA violations at USC and other schools. Miami. This is just odd circumstances that all are coming together at the same time that aren't your typical, again, run-of-the-mill, we cheated, NCAA violations, or unfortunately the sex-related type stuff at Penn State and Baylor. Just, yes. And so whether this ends, and when I say tragically, I mean from a football standpoint, tragically, correct. 9-3 tragically, and they just disappoint and don't fulfill the expectations, or this has some kind of glorious upturn to a championship. It's just a one in a zillion season, not just at Ohio State, just anywhere. It's crazy.
And part of me is an optimist, and I want to think like, what an amazing Cinderella story. And it's hard to think about Ohio State as, Cinderella. For those on the outside, but knowing now what this program has gone through in a very short amount of time. I mean, you and I, this entire summer, we didn't have much to talk about other than some light recruiting and what we might want to see going forward. The news cycle was pretty slow on that, which is always a good thing. But all of this coming out in a very short period of time, and everything kind of linking together, I think, again, Urban would never say, no, I'm not coming back next season, and just randomly announce it in the middle of a news conference for multiple reasons, one of them being for recruiting purposes. So I think we've yet to see the end of Urban Meyer's career, but I don't think it's far in the future.
Claire, it's usually a really fun conversation. Unfortunately, tonight and other times, it's been more of just a meaningful conversation, but it's always at least that, a very valuable conversation with Claire Crawford. So you got to join her on Twitter at Buckeye Claire, and don't you dare include an E.
I'm going to send Michael Myers to your house if you put an E on my name on Twitter.
Oh, that's a Halloween promise.
He is my
not
name.
A threat. It's a promise. Buckeye Claire, no E, and join her there for her take on Ohio State football. And we will do our best to bring in Claire once a week to talk Ohio State football through the end of the football season.
Next Wednesday, we're going to talk about this amazing birthday present that the Ohio State football team is going to give me on Saturday.
Okay, we will do that. Mark it down. We will see Claire next Wednesday. Thank you so much, Claire. Have a good night.
You too.
And I believe there's also a game this week in the SEC. Actually, there's two games that come to mind that may have something to do with division winners, division championships on the line. Yeah, it was almost like it was planned. LSU and Alabama, Kentucky and Georgia basically will decide, not completely. There could be chaos after that. It's feasible, but most likely the winners of those games will meet in the SEC championship game. We bring in Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama to break down the Bama side with the Bayou Bengals in Death Valley. Stephen, we thank you so much for your patience. I am going to try to figure out a better way to schedule these live streams because, as I mentioned to the folks off the top, when I used to slot you guys at specific times, that always broke down because of different people changing times and backing out and doing different things. But when I used to make a little adjustment there. There we go. But letting it be a free for all, maybe that's not the best either. So we appreciate Steve, your graciousness.
Oh man, this is cool. It's always a great time to join Mark Rogers on Wednesday.
All right, Stephen, this is the game right here. This is where it comes down to men playing men. Even regardless of the records or the ramifications or what's on the field, this seems to be the one team, again, regardless of what the records are, that doesn't just kind of cower in Bama's shadow and say that they don't seem to be intimidated. They know what kind of talent they have. They know that they have some muscle themselves. And this is the one team that typically shows up ready for a fight.
This is one game where I am just appreciating this ticket to Baton Rouge as I'm going to take the road early Saturday morning. I'm going to line up my music. I'm going to line up my collection of podcasts, and I'm taking this road to Baton Rouge because this is a matchup where it's grown man football. You got two teams that believe in playing grown man football. LSU quarterback Joe Burrow already showing the confidence, hey, we're not afraid of Alabama. Alabama doesn't scare us. Defensive back Grant Delpit talked about, Tua Tagovailoa in the secondary, the way we're going to present one to him. Delpit and cornerback Greedy Williams, two of the better guys in the Southeastern Conference, along with John Battle. And despite the fact that the Tigers may not have the receivers of years past, like a Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham Jr. or even a DJ Chark of that matter, you still got some speedsters. You got some pretty good playmaking guys, and one of those guys is 6'7" Steven Sullivan, of which it'll be interesting up on. As always, Mark, it's the men in the trenches, grown man football. You got Ed Ogeron, who maybe understand what he's saying at times. You may have to have a dictionary, a thesaurus, Google Translator, Rosetta Stone. Call up Dora the Explorer. Maybe Dora the Explorer can help you in terms of figuring out what Ed O. Coach that at the Pima. He's a defensive-minded guy. Isn't throwing that nasty on the opposing team, and Alabama, offensive line has to be able to throw that nasty ball. Looking forward to this drive at the Baton Rouge.
All right, we got Stephen M. Smith on the line from Touchdown Alabama. Stephen, I hope we've got a good transmission. You were kind of cutting up there during the last part of your eloquent dissertation on the Crimson Tide taking on LSU. 14.5 points. So it's hard to imagine that the biggest game of the week in college football, and there are other games. I know we've got Savannah Lee Richardson standing by to talk Georgia and Kentucky. She would argue that's the biggest game of the week. And we've got Michigan fans talking Penn State. There are so many big. I am going to be like DVRing and watching football all night, Saturday night into Sunday morning. There's so much great football on Saturday, but this is the game that's going to draw the most eyeballs. That Bama has been this dominant, that the team that arguably has the best resume in college football right now is LSU. I would argue best resume in college football, that they're a 14.5-point underdog at home. They beat Georgia by 20 at home.
It's crazy. It's crazy due to it's the Tua Tagovailoa effect. And Alabama has had a lot of quarterbacks come through the capstone to win championships under Nick Saban. You look at Greg McElroy, you look at A.J. McCarron, Jacob Coker, and nothing against those three at all. But when you look at Tua Tagovailoa, he brings an essence of excitement to this offense that, fans have craved, they have lusted to see for quite some time. The offenses before Tua were deemed as vanilla, boring, this is not captivating me. Now you bring in Tua, and you can't take a bathroom break. Now you bring in Tua, you can't even drink a 6-pack of beer. Now you bring in Tua, you can't get into the form of getting your snacks in order, because by the time you sit down, there's tour board. So LSU has beaten some pretty good teams this season. You beat Auburn, a shamble, right? Look out Georgia State, and played a lot better against A&M, but that Tua effect that Alabama has with him on that field slinging the football around has created a lot of the point spread for Alabama this season.
Got Stephen Smith on the line from Touchdown Alabama, breaking down the Tide and the Bayou Bengals at LSU. It will decide the SEC Western Division. Unless Bama wins, I think it decides the division. LSU may have to do a little bit of work, specifically against Texas A&M, a difficult assignment for them. I know the Iron Bowl is the Iron Bowl, but Auburn doesn't necessarily look up to the challenge this year. So when you look at this LSU team, one of the reasons why, of course, it's 2 touchdowns, that even though the offense has been, in Nick Saban's words, he even phrased it correctly, been very efficient. He didn't say explosive, been awesome, just been overwhelming. They've been very efficient. They've played well to the type of games that they've played. They've played well to the defense. But you started to talk about the wide receiver play and some of the skill position players. What have you seen out of Joe Burrow? Do you think he's up to that type of challenge that they may have to score 28 points Saturday?
He seems very confident. Like I mentioned, he came out and said, hey, if you're scared, don't come out the locker room. This is a very confident young man. He's been he hasn't done anything to jeopardize the season for LSU. I'll put it like that. Completing 54% or close to that, 53.6 to be more accurate there. He's got 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. But when you look at it, Mark, the type of teams that have beaten Alabama have come in these 3 different bags here. Number one, the teams that have beaten Bama normally have a dynamic, true dual threat quarterback that you wonder, how do I play this guy? I.e. a Cam Newton, a Deshaun Watson. Number 2, the type of team that's beaten Bama, a guy that may not be a dual threat quarterback, but he plays outside of himself. He plays bigger than what he truly is. I.e., you go back to 2010, South Carolina, Stephen Garcia. You even look at Bo Wallace 2014 against Ole Miss. Both of those guys play outside of themselves. And then you look at the third bag here, which is, of course, the team that comes by surprise and beats Alabama. And that would be the 2012 Texas A&M team with Johnny Manziel that went into Bryant-Denny and got that win. And nobody knew how good Johnny football was going to be. I mean, they saw him get a win against Florida. How cute, little Johnny running around playing backyard football. And then lo and behold, it's Johnny Manziel going with Bryant-Denny and just causing tears for the entire fan base inside the stadium. So it's the teams that have the dual threat quarterback, true dual threat quarterback. It's the teams that have the quarterback that plays outside of himself. And it's the teams that have the bag of surprise. Those are the ones that typically get Alabama at certain points. When I look at Joe Burrow, he doesn't fit the first or the third, but the number 2 option, the quarterback that plays outside of himself, he could potentially do that. It's going to take a lot for him, because there are a lot of Louisiana natives on this Alabama defense that want this game, Mark. I've been in practice all week. I have never seen Dylan Moses look this intense. Dylan Moses, a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he hails from University Southern Lab School in the heart of Baton Rouge. Dylan Moses is classified as the one that got away for all LSU fans. They courted him from day one. He chose to come to Alabama. They are very upset by his decision to come to Alabama. So this is a very emotional game for Dylan. This is an emotional game for guys like Isaiah Buggs, who hails from Ruston, Louisiana, Devontae Smith, who hails from Amite, Louisiana, which is an hour north of Baton Rouge. There are a lot of Louisiana kids that want this football game that are on the Alabama roster. So Joe Burrow has the confidence, but can he fit into that second mode of quarterback? One that is himself has to be seen.
Get Stephen M. Smith on the line talking Alabama and LSU. It's always a good one, but especially this year for most likely all the marbles in the SEC Western Division and what has been up until last year for a decade an automatic ticket to whether it be a BCS championship game or a college football playoff appearance as the SEC champion until Georgia broke that string against Auburn last year. So you mentioned Tua and him being the defining reason and why Vegas is very high on Bama, very confident that it's going to be not a comfortable win, but not down to the wire. But, of course, Tua is Tua, and Tua has been remarkable this year, always playing with a lead. And we know what he did in the championship game and give him all the credit in the world for stepping into a 13-0 game and doing what he did. But this year, not necessarily punched in the mouth like he will be in Death Valley. So with some grass stains, laying on his back every other throw, are we going to maybe see Tua get tested like we haven't seen before?
LSU's got a great defensive line, and it's going to be a test. You have Michael Divinity Jr., who leads the team with who shares the team lead with 4 sacks with Grant Delpit, the safety, helping him out there. But the atmosphere that is Tiger Stadium, that's a crazy atmosphere. That's an atmosphere that there's nothing like it. You walk in there, you see Mike the Tiger giving that intimidating pose inside the cage. You walk in there, you see the bevy of Tiger fans that are looking at you as if you're a piece of meat and they're the pit bull trying to destroy you with the amount of crowd noise. So it's a different atmosphere, and LSU feeds off that atmosphere. But at the same time, Alabama feeds off a ruckus atmosphere. So in terms of Tua being tested, Mark, it's going to come down to Bama's offensive line. I think this is the game where Brent Key, who is in his 3rd year at Alabama as the O-line coach, this is the year Brent Key really earns that paycheck. There are coaches that are great fits, but not necessarily great fits at the University of Alabama like that. Brent Key's been good, but there's still some times where I'm not sold on Brent Key. And I remember talking with offensive lineman Ross Pierschbaker back in the summer at SEC Media Days, and he talked to me about how Key has matured with this group. He's bought in with this group. He's gotten the attention of this group. But this will be the game, grown man football in the trenches. Can this offensive line give you a time to throw the football? Can this offensive line create those run lanes for these backs so that Najee, Damian, Josh, Brian Robinson, and the rest of the crew can take control of a game? This will be the atmosphere in the game, Mark Rogers, where Brent Key, offensive line coach, is going to have to earn that paycheck.
All right, it's Alabama, it's LSU in Death Valley Saturday night. And we got to Stephen M. Smith from Touchdown Alabama. He will be on the sideline. We will try to catch up with him sometime early next week to get his take on where the Tide stands after the big win or the big L as LSU tries to pull off the upset. So, Stephen, what scares you most about what's the formula for an Alabama loss? We would typically ask you for the formula for an Alabama win, but that's basically showing up and playing their standard game. What's the formula for an LSU win?
number one, creating turnovers. Creating turnovers, showing different looks. Dave Aranda's got to really disguise his coverage, be able to victimize Tua on a couple of throws. Definitely get pressure, get a lot of pressure, get Bama into third and long, second and long, and get the crowd into it. Keep the crowd involved in the football game as you can. And that's defensively. Offensively, I mentioned Mark, Joe Burrow is going to have to play a Steven Garcia-esque game. He's going to have to be darn near flawless. Of an offensive line is going to have to keep him upright, get the run game going. If MSU can control the clock, I think that's their biggest key. If Ed Orgeron, Dave Aranda, Joe Burrow, if MSU can find a way to control the clock and dominate time of possession, keep you off the field as long as we can for MSU.
All right, similar to what we saw 2 years ago in Death Valley, even though Alabama eventually prevailed 10-0, it was the game that in 2016, it was the game that lasted the longest in the entire college football season with no score. There was like no score with 8 or 9 minutes left in the game. Bama finally broke through on a Jalen Hurts touchdown run and won the game 10-0. Only difference this time around, oh yeah, Jalen Hurts won't be the quarterback, and LSU will have to defend the ball being thrown downfield by maybe the best quarterback in the nation. He has yet to throw an interception, right? I think we lost Steven, but I believe
fourth.
Okay. Steven, we appreciate you stopping by. I think we've lost you basically. It's cutting in and out, but you enjoy your trip to Baton Rouge. Stay safe. Savannah could possibly give you some tips that would help you out, but maybe not. Steven, again, we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy the Tide and the Tigers. It should be a great one.
Thank you.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love. And in looking at the schedule for Week 10, it's loaded with great games. And as I mentioned, the two in the SEC that should decide who's going to Atlanta. Bama, LSU, Kentucky at home against the Georgia Bulldogs. And we bring in Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated to break down the dog side of things. Savannah, how you doing tonight?
Good. Just trying to avoid trick-or-treaters. I live in a big neighborhood with my grandparents, and so it's literally took me like 10 minutes to get from the front entrance to my grandparents' house. And I mean, trick-or-treating's fun and all. I love Halloween, but that's aggravating.
Yeah, that can be aggravating when you're not prepared, and I'm not prepared either because typically I'm not home, so I don't think about it. I've got a zillion things on my mind. I wasn't thinking about getting candy. Any kind of chocolate that comes into this house goes straight into my mouth and it's gone. So it usually doesn't stick around. What's aggravating me right now, Savannah, just slightly, and I know we've had this conversation in the past, but that New England Patriots sweatshirt.
Yeah, well, I guess if you want to say my costume is this year, I'm a winner. So we're just going to go with that. But it was the first thing I kind of took today. I'm kind of doing laundry, getting ready to go to Kentucky this weekend, and it's kind of like, all right, let's just roll with it today. I actually got asked by Lamont like why I had a Patriots shirt on for interviews, but it's my team. I got to represent. I
still would think you would be a Falcons fan. Well, but anyway, we'll talk about that in the offseason. We've got important football matters here. Kentucky and Georgia. And Georgia's a huge favorite in this game, as we would expect, about 9 to 10 points. Pretty substantial. Have you had a chance to look over the Wildcats? Have you seen them much this season?
I've actually watched the Kentucky-Missouri game last night and kind of got a feel for it. And while I've been sitting here listening to you and Steven talk, I was looking up a little bit more about them and stuff, so I'd have a little bit better understanding than I did last week for sure. So
they somehow find a way, don't they? Well, the defensive side of it is not too difficult to figure out. They are just plain good with the likes of Jordan Jones and Mike Edwards and company. They are really good on the defensive side of the ball. They continue to hold down opponents in the SEC to 7, 10, Drew Lock, 14 points. So there's no mystery on that side of the ball. They're just flat out good. Now on the offensive side, they got the game that they needed out of Terry Wilson, and specifically the one drive out of Terry Wilson they needed in a game in which he threw for like 230 yards. That was by far his biggest passing output of the season. But I was looking through that game, Savannah, and yeah, the defense completely kept them in the game. They get the one big special teams play to get them within 14-9. And other than that, I looked at the drive chart, Savannah. They went 11 straight possessions without scoring a point on offense and still won the game.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty telling stat, actually. And to be honest, I don't know that they're going to be able to continue doing that. You know, that kind of luck always eventually runs out for teams who are usually one-sided on the offense. Like Kentucky, most of the time they're depending on Benny Snell, Terry Wilson to use their legs and get stuff done on the ground. But Terry Wilson is also going to have to he's going to have to throw the ball if they want to defeat Georgia. Georgia has the best passing defense in the SEC right now. And with DeAndre Baker going to be on Lynn Bowden Jr., I don't know that Kentucky's going to be able to really get a passing game going, to be honest with you. It's just not – I mean, Georgia's secondary is just way too good. Kentucky does not have the targets in that area, in my opinion anyway, that can really get the job done. It's not – they have Benny Snell. Whenever you think of Kentucky, you think of Benny Snell. Of course, Terry Wilson has really made a name for himself throughout this season. I mean, he kind of has to, being the other key link to the offense. But at the same time, I don't know that they've really played a defense of Georgia's mentality, if that makes sense. Even though Georgia's hasn't been up to par like they were last season with Roquan and them, I also think that Georgia's defense continues to get better each week. And after the loss to LSU, they kind of had a come to Jesus meeting, and they have done better. They didn't stop the run like they should last weekend, but it was an improvement in my opinion. So Kentucky's going to have to find a passing game if they want to keep up with Georgia.
Well, they found a passing game, as I mentioned last week, or at least for them, a semblance of a passing game, but it all came on basically one drive, and it goes to one guy. The same guy catches all the passes, and I'm exaggerating to a certain extent. They've got a decent tight end in C.J. Conrad, but Lynn Bowden caught 13 passes last week for $166, and they don't target him quite as much every week, but basically he's the guy in the passing game. So I guess Adrian Baker, go cover him and lock him down, and we should be fine, and everybody else gang up on Benny Snell.
Well, I honestly think that, not to just sit there and say that Georgia's probably going to pull in everybody to sell out and stop the run, but at the same time, that's what's going to be able to get Kentucky third and out and get them off the field, to get Georgia's offense going and everything. And to be honest, Missouri has the number 12 passing defense in the SEC out of 14, Kentucky being number 13 behind them. And that's just in SEC games alone. So, I mean, it's not like Terry Wilson was really throwing up against any secondary that can really make that is similar to Georgia's, especially because, I mean, Georgia is crazy good.
Can I interrupt, Savannah? I want to get something straight here. You just told me that Kentucky is the second worst. When I was looking at stats on Sunday, I was looking at offenses. That's my bad. Okay. Yes. Kentucky is extremely good defense. And I don't buy into the whole total yardage deal. It's an indicator, but that obviously if you're Alabama and you're winning every game by 40 points, then the other team's throwing the ball constantly. They're going to gain meaningless yardage. Yeah. So you can take that a number of different ways. But for Kentucky, it should be pretty accurate because they play close games against everybody. They played Vandy 14-7. They play close games against everybody. And so actually their stats should be pretty meaningful because they're not playing any garbage time. Compared to the other teams.
I was looking at the offense instead of the defense. I clearly need glasses. But for sure, Kentucky's played everybody close this season. However, I also think that a lot of times when they do play these teams, they on the defensive side of things, they shut down what works the best for that team. I don't know that Kentucky's defense is going to be able to do that. What I'm trying to get at is I think Georgia's defense is going to be able to stop Benny Snell and Terry Wilson and whoever else and push them to third and long get off the field and essentially do what LSU did to Georgia. Get that defense gassed and just be able to run all over the defense. I thoroughly believe that Georgia's going to stick to a run-heavy offense and make Kentucky stop them. I mean, DeAndre Swift looks almost back completely healthy, and then you also have Elijah Holyfield that's still running with a lot of purpose. And so I think my main point is, regardless if you're looking at stats or anything like that, is I don't know that Kentucky's defense has seen an offense this lethal and this high-powered, putting up 400-plus yards of total offense a game. So that's going to be the interesting part to me is how if Kentucky's defense can hang on, and if Georgia's defense can do what they're supposed to do. I guess it's kind of one of those things. It's like, you just do your job, and it's just going to work out.
Okay, Savannah, let's be honest here. I want you to be completely honest. You have absolutely no concern about this game. None.
Well, I did earlier in the week. And then I started watching some film on Kentucky, and I got to give Josh Allen credit because that kid's good with 14.5 tackles for a loss.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's incredible. But like I said, Georgia's front seven is continuously getting better. Going to get Kentucky's offense off of the field, and I don't necessarily. I mean, there's no concern, yeah, but also at the same time, I know how good Georgia's team is, and Kentucky has never played on a stage of this level and this magnitude. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this much pressure with the SEC East title on the line. Georgia's been there. Kentucky hasn't.
That's very true. If you look at it that way, that if you just look at opponents, they've played a lot of good opponents, maybe not quite as good as Georgia, but they played Florida. They played Texas A&M on the road. They played Mississippi State. They've beaten a lot of good teams that are kind of a step below Georgia, top 25-ish kind of teams. So I don't know that they're going to be wowed by, like, they play Georgia every year. They know what the talent level is and the speed. But you're right. If they really let it sink in, okay, this is the game for everything. If we win this game, we just take care of business against teams that we should, and we are going to the SEC championship game. This is it. Whereas Georgia, yeah, this is more, okay, we made a run through the SEC last year. We beat Auburn in the championship game. We played a college football playoff at the Rose Bowl. We played Alabama for the national championship. We went to Death Valley a few weeks. They've played, 6 or 8 games kind of like this game. We went to Notre Dame last year.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids have played, a number of stages that were like everybody, bam, watching the game, focus on this game, got to win this game. And this is kind of a first deal for Kentucky.
Exactly. And to go on what you're saying about Georgia being in play, this is the 3rd week in a row, besides a bye week again, of course, before Florida, that Georgia's played a top 10 opponent. Is that, because Florida's number 9, and now it's a top 10 opponent for the 3rd week in a row. And I think that says a lot to people sitting there saying that Georgia is not necessarily playing a lot of people, but at the same time, as Georgia sits on the stage every single week, competes on the stage every single week, and Kentucky's kind of cruised through it. They beat Florida and ended the streak, and that was wonderful for them. And I'm giving complete credit for them. It's awesome that they are sitting in this position, sitting 1 game away from going to the SEC championship game that they haven't done in a modern era. I mean, their last true SEC championship was in 1950 when Paul Bear Bryant was coaching the team. They share one with Georgia in 1976, but there were some, technicalities to that. So they haven't seen this. And it's awesome that the SEC East is sitting in this position, because usually one team runs the SEC East each year, it seems like, and it's more so trying to figure out the SEC West in Atlanta. But now it's both sides going neck and neck, and it's this week alone. So,
yeah, what's refreshing about this year is that if you go back about 10 years, you had a number of like Florida-Georgia fights, and Florida was obviously dominant. And then they moved on. Well, Urban Meyer moved on is what happened anyway. And then you had all sorts of seasons where Georgia was supposed to be the best team, and sometimes they were. They obviously 2012 being their best team in a long time. And then you had the Missouri run. You had, but it was always the thought that this team that's going to come out of this is really not that good. Florida won 2 consecutive years with Jim McElwain on the sideline, and they weren't that good. They got blown out in the SEC title game. And so there was always the thought that either, there was one team that was so much better than everyone else, like Georgia last year, that won it, with no issues, beat everyone that they needed to. The division was never really in doubt. Or, yeah, we've got a bunch of mediocre teams and somebody has to win it. This is the first time, okay, in a long time that we had a game this late in the season, okay, head-to-head, bam, Georgia, what we would have thought maybe Tennessee or Kentucky or something like that, or Florida, I should say, but it's happened to be Kentucky jumping out there. So it's a really good matchup. Now maybe it'll be 21-0 after the first quarter, and then we'll be done with it, and somebody like me will move on to something else. But it's going to be boom, front and center at 3:30 Eastern time for me, because this is to get to the SEC championship game, and once you do that, you're playing for a college football playoff. And unless somebody trips up against a Louisville or Georgia Tech, which I don't foresee, especially on Georgia's side, of course. All right, any news out of camp? Anything happened this week? Anybody say anything stupid that we can laugh at or make fun of, or anything tweeted out there, Savannah, that we can jump on?
Actually, no, there's not. Georgia's has their guys pretty trained not to, disrespect another team, not talk really any smack when it comes to interviews, especially being asked about opponents and stuff. So there's not anything like that. I will say Ben Cleveland, the offensive lineman that went down with a fractured leg back in September, he is likely going to see some playing time this weekend. Don't necessarily think that he will start, but he is finally healthy enough to where he can start taking reps, start getting hit. And so that's going to be a big plus for Georgia's offensive line if he can come in and be that guy that he needs to on the right side with Isaiah Wilson. Other than that, there's still two key defensive linemen that are out for Georgia, which is going to be a struggle in a sense. But at the same time, you also have freshman Jordan Davis, who has really stepped up the past two weeks in LSU and in Florida last week with helping Tyreek McGee with the strip sack and really developing as a player. He is so physically strong. It's kind of like, I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but he is the real life version of the Mountain. And once he gets into physical shape where the staff and the strength and conditioning program wants him, he's going to be like the next All-American defensive lineman out of Georgia. I've been preaching about this kid since he got onto campus, and it's finally coming to fruition. He's finally worked hard enough. I'm really excited to see where he goes in the next couple of weeks. I also think that DeAndre Baker's so hungry. He did Marty and McGee last week before the Florida game, and I've hung out with him a couple times outside of practice and stuff, and that kid looked so ready to go. He is so focused. He has one goal in mind, and that is to get to Atlanta again. And he is one of the biggest leaders in the defense, and is one of the reasons why whenever you see a spark come out of the defense, it's coming from DeAndre Baker. And so that's something that's really crucial for Georgia to continue to get this year. I think that's what we were missing in the first half of the season, kind of when we were trying to figure out what is Georgia doing. They didn't have a defensive leader. And so he's one of the guys that's really stepped up. Him and Natrez Patrick are two guys that have really just owned this leadership role. Other than that, there's not really any other big news coming out of Athens. It's just another business week. We didn't get any practice availability today. We did get some the past 2 days, and the guys were doing what they normally do, working through fundamentals, getting ready for Kentucky. And well, I will note this, that Trey Scott, who is our defensive line coach, his message to the team yesterday was build the wall for the East. This, in other words, this game is going to win the East by who wins in the trenches. And if Georgia's front seven can stop Kentucky's Benny Snell and everything, that's what it is. We're trying to build a wall to contain the East and keep our East title. So that was really probably the only notable thing that I really liked this week. Other than that, it's business as usual, and we're just ready for Saturday.
Georgia, Kentucky on Saturday. Before we turn it over to Kevin McGuffey, and last word on college football on the Wildcats side, I got to hit you with this because there's a few people in the chat that want you to talk about the quarterbacks and apparently remembering, or maybe they're misremembering, that you were calling for Justin Fields to be the starter.
Oh, I was full on ready for him to take his snaps and get a few series in. Don't think I was saying starter, but I could have. I mean, at that point in time, we didn't know whether or not Jake Fromm was going to get out of that sophomore slump. And I don't know that he is necessarily out of the sophomore slump that so many people have put him in. He did what he was supposed to do. He showed up last week, and he managed the team like he did last season. And that's what Georgia needs out of him. I also think that Justin Fields is continuing to grow, learning the playbook, and really getting accustomed to how things are done at Georgia. Fromm did what he was supposed to do. I remember telling you that if he comes in and does what he's supposed to do, gets, some momentum, there's no reason why that you should take him out and take away from the rhythm that he has going with the offense by putting Justin Fields in. I thoroughly think that Justin Fields should be getting more snaps and getting some playing time, but at the same time, when Fromm's doing what he did against Florida, it's kind of hard to continue to say that. So, yeah, I would love to see Justin Fields get some playing time, but at the same time, stick with Fromm until he proves to you that it's consistently not getting better, if that makes sense.
All right, we got Savannah Lee Richardson on the line from Bulldog Illustrated. The Dogs and the Cats for the SEC East lead. And Savannah, before we let you go, Big Poppy JT on the chat room is going Kentucky 17, Georgia 7. That's his score.
I have to disagree. I don't think that Kentucky's defense is going to be able to stop Georgia's offense to 7 points. LSU's defense couldn't even stop Georgia's offense to under 19 points. And so, that's 16. Fine. 17. Well, sorry.
16.
That's 16. Sorry. My weeks are running together. But
I'm just joking with you. And Big Poppy's not even a Kentucky fan.
That's
just having fun with you.
To be honest, a lot of Florida fans continue to talk this week after the big loss and stuff. So I'm just ready for the team to get on the field and handle business. Whether it ends in a loss or it ends in a win, it's a college football game, and we love this sport because you don't ever know what could happen on a Saturday. I can be as confident as I am right now that Georgia's going to come in and handle business, but at the same time, Kentucky can do the same thing. So that's the biggest reason why I love college football, is because any given day somebody can go in and upset a team. So it's going to be a good matchup. I'm excited. I just hope Georgia's defense, slows down Benny or essentially stops them. I'd love to see Terry Wilson.
All right, Georgia and Kentucky. Savannah, enjoy the game. You're going on up to Lexington, correct?
Yes, I'll be on the sidelines again for the Kentucky game.
All right, maybe you can say hi to Kevin.
Maybe.
All right, Savannah, take care.
Have a good night.
All right, we got Kevin McGuffey on the line as well to give us the other side, the blue side, the big blue side. 7-1, Kevin. Did you believe that it was going to get to this point?
Did I believe it's going to get to this point?
Yeah,
no.
7-1.
No. And for like 59 minutes of the game on this past Saturday, you wouldn't have thought that either. But it was one of the most incredible drives that, Kentucky fans years from now will be talking about the drive, I think, when they talk about this season. And, Terry Wilson comes from being benched to, looking like, Tom Brady or, an Aaron Rodgers on that last drive. And then they got the extra play to beat Missouri. And, we all talked about it afterwards, that these are the kind of things you go back through history. Kentucky's always the Missouri in this situation. You go back to the 93 Peach Bowl, the Bluegrass Miracle, the Florida game last year. Kentucky's always the one, we're the Charlie Brown to the other team's Lucy. And it just, for once, it was on the other, she was on the other foot. And like I said, it's just been, everybody's just ready for Saturday now. It's just, let's get here Saturday, 3:30. Let's do this. That's kind of the mindset right now.
So Kevin, I made mention to you, after the game, I congratulated you over Twitter or Facebook, and I made the comment that I couldn't see the game. It was on the SEC network, but I checked in, and I kept looking at the game cast, and I saw that they had to drive the length of the field. They went 81 yards after they got the big punt return for a touchdown, but the ESPN game cast, because of the way it's automated, because the game hit double zeros, it showed – it was confusing because I saw, all sorts of different, like penalty, but it hit double zero and it said final score, Missouri 14, Kentucky 9. And then of course they got the extra play and Wilson throws the touchdown pass. So regardless of his limitations in the passing game, He laid it in there on the left sideline by the pylon when he needed to, with no time on the clock, and threw for 237 yards, I think was the number.
Yeah, I think it's 267.
267. Man, I shorted him 30 yards. 267, and that does come to mind because I compared that against his highest game previous, which I think was 163. So he showed up and made plays in that final drive. In particular, and Lynn Bowden was most of the time the target.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, Lynn Bowden had a career game. You know, we've talked about him numerous times here, and like Saturday, he had the career game. You know, 13 catches, 166 yards, and then had the the punt return. You know, for the touchdown. You know, usually David Bouvier returns the punts for Kentucky, and before when the Kentucky stopped him on third down, Coach Bowden went to Coach Stoops and said, "Look, let me do this. I'm going to take it, take it to the house." And Coach Stoops was like, he said, after the game, it was like, "Okay, you go do your thing," basically, and and that's what he did. Yeah, I mean, he had that breakout performance that, and you can see it, he getting better like every game in spurts, and he finally put it all together on Saturday. But yeah, there was. I don't know how big a music fan or whatever. There's a Chris Stapleton concert here. He's big. He's from Kentucky. He's real big, country music these days. He's playing a sold out show at Rupp Arena, and that was, a lot of people that had, because by the time the game was over, that concert, the opening acts were starting, and everybody was on like, Kentucky lost, and then all of a sudden, oh no, Kentucky won, because like I said, as you said, the ESPN thing, it updated or it didn't update, but then like Yahoo or CBS Sports or something, it's showing Kentucky won. And so, there was a lot of confusion for people who didn't actually get to see the game. But yeah, I mean, like I said, Terry Wilson, you can't say nothing but good things about him. We talked about, last week that, Coach Stoops and Eddie Grand, Darren Henshaw were going to play. They played Gunnar Hoke a couple of series. They played Danny Clark for one series. And even Coach Stoops still says he may play Hoke again a couple of series this weekend. So that, that'll be something. But, he, like I said, he came in on that last play. He threw an interception. It was 14-9. He threw an interception with 3 minutes to go. And we're like, I was like, okay, well, same old Kentucky. We're going to, lose it. And then, but the defense, we have to talk about that defense, against Drew Lock and, a high-powered Missouri offense, 8 3-and-outs in the second half. They did not get a first down in the second half. It was just, amazing. And this, I have to give a shout out to Big Papi there. I like his, I like his way of thinking. I think, I really, I'm not trying to be a homer. I really think Kentucky can win. If we've yet to see somebody score, do a lot of damage against his defense, and until they do, why not? They like to use the phrase "why not Kentucky?" So why not Kentucky?
Absolutely, they can win, and I think it's one of our flaws as sports fans, especially as football fans, that we're more impressed with offense than defense. So if Kentucky marched into this game and they were winning every game 48-45, we'd be like, man, Kentucky's on a roll. They're 7-1. They just beat Florida last week, 48-45, and then they beat Vandy 47-44. We would have no issue with that necessarily. Many of us, I shouldn't say, I would certainly be raising the red flag. This defense is horrible. But you know how it is. A lot of people would be like impressed with those scores. But when you inverse it and the scores are 15-14, 14-7, it's like, well, this team's not that good. What's wrong with them? They can't score. They're not going to be able to score against Georgia. But see, the Georgia offense plays the Kentucky defense too. So not saying that the Georgia offense is not capable, because they are, but Kentucky is holding teams down unlike anybody in the conference. And by some measurements, anybody really in the country against this level of competition, where these teams are only scoring 10 and 15 points a game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back and look, I think it's, as far as scoring margin, Kentucky, or not scoring margin, but scoring defense, I think Kentucky's number one. I think they're allowing 13. It's like 13 points a game. And then Clemson, I think, is maybe like 13.4. And then there's somebody else in there. You think about, we're 8 games into the season, and the only, 2 teams, Central Michigan scored 20, the first game of the season. And then, Texas A&M scored 20. But of course, that last touchdown came, in an overtime. Like I said, it's the best. We've talked about this before. Like the years that you always talk about with Kentucky football are 1977, 1984, and 2007, and this is the best defense that Kentucky's had since 1977. They had a guy, Art Still, who was number 2 pick in the draft that year.
Kansas City Chiefs.
Went on to have a great NFL career. He was the leader of that defense, and that's the kind of numbers that this team is putting up. And the 48 to 45 games, that would have been the years when Hal Mumme was here, where basically the defense was just something they had to do to get the ball back. Because I've seen many, went to many a game and saw many a game where the Kentucky would score and then he would just do an onside kick and try to get the ball back, and then if the other team scored, it's like, whatever, we'll just try to score. But yes, to your point, the defense is just something that is just amazing. Has been amazing this year. Josh Allen, Jordan Jones, Mike Edwards, Darius West, Derek Beatty, all these guys are just playing. Cash Daniel, they're just it's just been incredible to watch. Like I said, we've never, as Kentucky fans, we've never had to see in most of our lifetimes, we've never had a season like this. So
we've got Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football on the line, breaking down the Wildcats side of the big battle with Georgia. That's in the Commonwealth in Lexington. So there'll be plenty of blue showing up, as Kevin displays for us right there. Kevin, you can guess if I would take a poll in the live chat right now. We've got 32 people watching us right now, and of course hundreds of thousands will watch this video once it's posted, of course. If we had a raise of hands, and maybe I'll ask people in the live chat if you can break up your conversation, how many people are rooting for Georgia? How many people are rooting for Kentucky that aren't Kentucky or Georgia fans? You've got the nation behind you. The college football nation is rooting for Kentucky to win this game.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. It's the Cinderella, the Cinderella story, to use a line from Caddyshack. Nobody has expected this, and there's a lot of, I think they have probably gained a lot of new fans this year, and probably the same way with people rooting against Alabama, because they've won so much, and like I said, Kentucky's never been here before, so why not root for them? So I would be interested to see how many people would say they were rooting for Kentucky as well.
All right, Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football. Kevin, what do you have lined up, both yourself and the rest of the crew there at Last Word on College Football?
Well, myself, I'm working on, hopefully I'll be out tomorrow. Basically, I'm working on a kind of a recap of how Kentucky got to this point. Somebody had mentioned the fact the other day that the game Saturday will be 6 years to the day that Kentucky fired Joker Phillips as head football coach. And so basically the 6-year journey where, in this day and age of, win now, the athletic director, Mitch Barnhart, and, has shown a lot of patience with Coach Stoops. And it's finally, he said, in his press conference when he first started, said, it's going to take time, but we're going to build an SEC caliber team. We're going to have an SEC caliber defense. And of course, everybody's like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And, and here we are basically on the cusp of the biggest game. Like I said, the biggest game that at least in 40 years, if not, like I said, in most of our lifetime. So, that's the big thing. That's what I'm working on. I think Tony Siracusa has a post up, just went up today talking about the whole Maryland situation. I know that's kind of, I don't know. Like I said, I was, out a lot of this evening, so I haven't got to, hear what else you guys have been talking about. But, that's going on. We have our weekly Heisman ratings, our rankings. I think they'll come out tomorrow or Friday. So there's a lot of good stuff there. Even if you're not a Kentucky fan, but you should be anyway. Just search for the Kentucky. Go to Last Word in College Football. You can search for Kentucky or search for my name, and all the stuff will come up. But anyway, that's kind of what I'm working on. It's been kind of fun to go back through the 6 years that Stoops has been here. From the struggles. And then how it's just slowly built to, to where we are right now. It's like I said, I keep using the word incredible, but it's just, Kentucky fans aren't used to this. And the fact that Kentucky's basketball team plays Duke on Tuesday night and nobody's really talking about it. So it's all, everybody's just, zeroed in on this game on Saturday.
So either they won't be talking about it Saturday night, or everyone will instantly turn to start talking about it on Saturday night. We'll just have to see how that one plays out. And just to put it in perspective, we've got Steve Helwig from Bucknuts on 247 coming up next to talk Ohio State football. Of course, the Buckeyes are 7-1, Kentucky 7-1, but at Ohio State, it feels like they're teetering on the brink. People are about to jump off bridges. You know, the season's over. They're number 10 in the country. But for Kentucky, 7-1 sure sounds good. And each week that number has gone up. Of course, that's a good thing. But to go from 7-1 to 8-1, that will be, in particular, very, very sweet, of course, Kevin.
Oh yeah, because like I said, as you said, you know, you're talking to Savannah. You know, the winner of this game, you know, goes to Atlanta, and you know, I know you probably saw the the college football rankings, you know, that came out last night. You know, Kentucky was 9th and Ohio State was 10th. So a lot of the people in our area, you know, Northern Kentucky, live in Ohio, have been kind of excited about that. So you know, like I said, is it going to last? Who knows? But you know, like I said, we're just enjoying the ride right now. And like I said, I can see Kentucky, you know, winning a close game on Saturday, like a 20-17 or 21-14, you know, something. You know, like I said, until somebody proves that they can whip this Kentucky defense, I just, you know, you got to put a lot of stock in what they've done so far.
Yeah, even the game they lost to Texas A&M only scored 14 points in regulation. So nobody's done anything against the defense for the most part. Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football breaking down the Cats, taking on the Dogs, and of course, Dogs and Cats, and it makes sense, but it's a fight for the SEC Eastern Division Championship this particular season. Kevin, we appreciate it. Hopefully, you enjoy the game. And I can't root because you, Savannah, you're both great guests, and I'll just enjoy the game, and we'll talk about it. Afterwards.
You can be France.
I could be France, but between you and me, you know, Georgia's won enough. I will be rooting for Kentucky to win this game. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I understand. And of course, now the Georgia people in the chat are going to be coming after you, but
well, I'm used to it.
It's part of it,
Kevin,
right?
You have a great night.
All right, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Always look forward to talking to you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. Kentucky and Georgia, they're both 7-1, 3:30 Eastern time, and that's a CBS game, as CBS also has the big LSU-Alabama game for the Western Division side, most likely to go to Atlanta and take on the winner of Kentucky and Georgia. I will be around for the next few minutes as I await Steve Helwig from Bucknuts to talk more Ohio State football. We've got the call-in number at 860-325-3687. The only thing I will let you know is that if Steve jumps on the line, I will cut our conversation short so we can jump on with Steve. But other than that, phone lines open at 860-325-3687. And certainly once Steve's done, I will hang around for a few minutes to see if anyone wants to call in the show. If you are stopping by for the first time, this is MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We deliver the very best in college football analysis. Yes, there are other people out there. There's certainly tons of other people out there that are awful. There's no doubt about that. It is not difficult to go online and find bad, inept college football analysis. That's easy to do. But there are other people out there that do a great job. Certainly watch them, take in their content as well. But we believe we deliver just about as good college football content, debate, discussion as anyone, anywhere. And certainly we will take your phone calls. Steve Helwig on the line coming up soon to talk Ohio State football as the Buckeyes take on Nebraska. This is MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Mark? It's Big Poppy.
Big Poppy, how are you?
Good, right. So I just got done studying. I was watching your show while I was studying for my big math test tomorrow.
Okay.
And I just got done, and I was getting ready to take a shower, but I saw a lot of people in the comment section underestimating Kentucky, thinking that they're going to get rolled over. And then I've been telling Georgia fans at school all week that Kentucky is going to humble you guys in the most honest way, because this Kentucky team, when you think about it, Mark, is built just like LSU. Run the ball, not really good on offense, but great defense. And what did LSU do to Georgia? Last time I checked, it was 38-16, and this Kentucky team is built almost identically to LSU, but with a better defense, as the stats show that Kentucky has better defense than LSU. And I think Georgia fans are about to get a rude awakening. And I had Kentucky winning this game, but even if Kentucky doesn't win this game, Georgia fans are going to be having a hard time in the whole entire game, because there's one thing that this Kentucky team has, Mark, and it's grit. When Georgia lost to Auburn, when Georgia lost to LSU, nothing was going right. Nothing was going right on defense. Jay Fromm looked like he couldn't complete a big pass play to save his life. Nothing was going right. But Kentucky, nothing can go right for Kentucky. And they still can find a way to win the game. And that is good, Mark. You don't find it a lot in college football. Kentucky also hasn't allowed the team to score 20 points on them the whole entire season. And I told another Georgia fan that, and it was like, oh, Texas A&M. I was like, Texas A&M averages 400 yards, 500 yards on offense almost every game, or somewhere near that number. And they only had about 200, maybe 300 yards against Kentucky. Do you know how big of a drop-off that is? I was telling them, I was like, that is a huge drop-off compared to what Texas A&M normally averages. And then the 20 points, they really only allow 14 because of the overtime. So this Kentucky team is going to humble Georgia in the most humblest way. And Georgia fans' worlds are going to come crashing down, because this Kentucky team is going to knock them dead in the mouth. Because Kentucky doesn't have nothing. Everything against Missouri, it looked like nothing was going right. They had 8 straight 3-and-outs. The defense allowed 14 points in the first half. And then in the second half, the defense didn't allow no more points out of Missouri. And then Kentucky's offense still came out slow. But in the fourth quarter, everybody hates on my dog Terry Wilson. But when Terry Wilson needed to show up, what did he do? He showed up and won the game for Kentucky. And now he's a big man on campus. And he has to play the best game of his life that he's ever played in football. Pop Warner football, middle school football, high school football, JUCO college football, all those performances, it all comes down to this game against Georgia. He has to play the best game he's ever played in all his years playing college football, or football in general. And I believe Kentucky's going to win this game 17-7, because just like this team is built just like LSU, Mark. Just like LSU, or nearly identical. And Georgia is going to have no answer. And they're going to lose 17-7.
Okay, there you hear it right there from Big Papi. Of course, I'm going to have my prediction a little bit later in the week. I'm not going to give it away right now because I have no idea what I'm going to predict once I review these two teams. But I've seen, let's see, Georgia play most of the LSU game. Georgia hasn't really played many good teams, so I haven't seen them play that much. But I watched the Florida game just about every play. Kentucky I saw play a little bit against Mississippi State. I saw some of the Texas A&M game. I saw him play South Carolina a little bit, some of the Florida game, and Texas A&M, yeah. So, it should be a really interesting game in the Wildcats playing defense about as well as anybody in the country right now, but they cannot turn over the ball, and they need to get something out of that passing game, which they did get on the road at Missouri last week out of Terry Wilson. So hopefully he's on his game if you're a Kentucky fan, because they're going to need that desperately.
Yep. So it was good talking with you, Mark. Don't forget to pray for the Miami Hurricanes before you go to sleep, because we need it, because I don't know what Mark Rick is doing. I went on the rain a few days ago. I lost my voice, and I just don't know what he's doing. It's starting to Kosi. Did you not, Mark? I know you wasn't the only person you saw him, but we ready to go ice cold in the second half. Ice cold.
Big Papi, I said when Mark Richt named Rocher the starting quarterback after last season during the spring that was a mistake, that there is no way that he saw enough improvement out of Rocher at that point to negate what we saw the last 3 or 4 games of last season, that there wasn't a open quarterback competition. There was no way that it could have been. So I didn't agree with the decision then. If he would have made it in August, I could have bought that, okay, throughout the spring, the summer individual workouts, the August camp, okay, he's seen and he's made a decision, and Rocher must have improved. But typically quarterbacks don't improve, or anybody, between their junior year and their senior year if they've already played 14 or 15 games, starting games. And so I never bought that Rocher was the guy at all from the moment they stepped off the field at the Orange Bowl against Wisconsin, that he should not have been the starter anymore.
And this is a 5th-year senior, Mark, that doesn't play like one at all. If N'Kosi Perry played like that, I could live with that. But a 5th-year senior, I'm not going to tolerate that. A 5th-year senior that's been in the same offensive system for 3 years, I will not accept that at all. And I brought N'Kosi Perry jersey, and I'm aware of it because N'Kosi Perry should be on the field. I don't know what Mark Richt is doing, but Warren Sapp spoke out on it. Warren Sapp said that Miami Hurricanes football is down on Twitter. And that's one thing for fans to say, but when a former alumni of Pro Football Hall of Famer says it, that's something for concern. So I really hope that we get an offensive coordinator, and I hope Mark Richt reassesses the situation. I believe that he won't commit to N'Kosi Perry right now because he's going with Malik because I think that he doesn't feel N'Kosi Perry's the future despite what he says. I feel that he wants Jaron Williams because I don't know if you heard about Jaron Williams, Mark, but he was a dark horse in the Miami quarterbacks competition, and he really pushed the envelope. Like it was a fair quarterback. Well, it should have been a fair quarterback battle, but Jaron Williams got there, I believe, in the summer. He was pushing the envelope. Mark Richt said that he is the better passer than N'Kosi and Malik. Better arm, accurate. So and he's a pro-style quarterback, which is what Mark Richt likes. So I think Mark Richt is really in the back of his head wanting to go with Jaron Williams. So I just think it's kind of messed up how he's handling the situation with N'Kosi, but that's how I feel.
All right, Big Poppy, I'm right there with you on the analysis as I am trading messages with Steve Helwig from Bucknuts. He's having some issues getting on the line, and if he continues to have issues, then we'll shut down and we'll start up a new live stream so we can get the Ohio State talk in with Steve Helwig from Bucknuts. Big Poppy, anything else on your mind?
Pray for the Miami Hurricanes. And also, did you see Joe Klatt?
Okay, I do have a prayer list, Big Poppy, but I'm going to have to put the Canes way down the list. They're going to be way down the list, Big Poppy. Okay, get in your comment from Joel Klatt, and then we've got Steve Helwig waiting.
Joe Klatt went in on UCF, Mark. You got to go watch it. After you get done, look up Joe Klatt, UCF. He said no Group of 5 team deserves to be in the college football playoff. It made me so mad. Just like what you said, Mark. Before the season, everybody on the committee should go and say the Group of 5 teams have no chance. You got to watch it, Mark. It will make you so mad.
All right. Thanks, Big Poppy. I appreciate it. You have a great weekend. All right. All right, man, we've got a log jam here suddenly. We've got Steve Helwig just jumping on the line from Bucknuts. Steve, how you doing tonight?
All right.
I'm doing good.
The Buckeyes with a big game against the Nebraska. The Huskers got into the win column in the Big Ten 2 weeks ago against Minnesota, 53-28, and of course followed that up with a game against Bethune-Cookman, and of course they won that game. Or the Lincoln Memorial Stadium there would have really imploded. Steve, let's talk about the Buckeyes situation. So the big news, of course, this week is concerning Urban Meyer's the information he unveiled concerning his health issues. And
definitely, he's been going through some issues. Obviously, he collapsed on the sideline at one game and tried to downplay it for the longest time, but really came out yesterday with a group of reporters, both locally and nationally, guys that he has worked with, and basically said that the issues are probably a little bit more serious than he's been letting on, and that he's trying to work his way through it through medicine, and just trying to be able to continue to conduct his normal everyday routine. But obviously he is in some pain, it seems, and going through some difficult times. So he's going to try and make the best of it. I have no way to predict what the future will hold for this situation. If he decides when this season is over that he wants to take a leave of absence to get it figured out, then who could blame him? I think he's entitled to live a happy and pain-free life. It's just right now, when you watch Ohio State play, you can see the pained expression on his face and the different things that have happened. I think a lot of it's been the stress involved from what was going on before the season started with Zach Smith, and that whole situation probably helped exacerbate it. And he's doing the best he can right now to control it through medicine. And Ohio State is coming off of an open week. He reiterated he wants to do everything he can to make Ohio State successful and have the best season that they can have. And so that's where his loyalty lies, I guess, right now. And obviously we'll see what the future holds.
So, yeah, you take a situation where Urban Meyer's already shown the propensity to take losing hard, and not just losing, because he's won national championships at Florida. And we know from the aftermath of that, and then what was forced on him by his daughters in regards to signing the contract and taking a little bit lighter approach mentally, physically, and emotionally to the game, that he is just competitive. And anybody who reaches the pinnacle of a major sport like this is obviously wired different than most of us. And there is great pressure at Ohio State to win, and he places great pressure on himself. And then on top of that, very few of us can relate to, and basically none of us that are probably listening to this can relate to, going through the situation that he went to, magnified by the public scrutiny poured down upon him. So you put all those things together with the previous health issues, the pressure winning, the recent loss, the issues they're having just on the field with the Zach Smith scandal. And it's difficult to relate to all of that coming together for one person at one time.
Yeah, no question about it. He's been to hell and back basically here in the last 3-4 months. And again, I think you see, very evidently that the pained expressions on his face and the way he rubs his head, and just obviously the cyst that he has is putting some kind of pressure, obviously, on his brain or whatever it is. I'm not a neurologist, so I can't get into any more details about it than what's probably been reported. And I think Pete Thamel from Yahoo talked directly with his doctor to get, I guess, what the diagnosis or the prognosis is. So I guess, again, he is adamant that he's going to try and work his way through this as best as he can. And obviously he had some type of a surgical procedure in 2014. It was portrayed at the time as a very minor surgical procedure. And in fact, he was back at work very quickly after that situation had occurred. So I guess, again, we just have to kind of allow him to work through this the best that he can, and see, again, I think his well-being and his family situation and his health, I think, take precedence over, whatever else is really going on, I think. I mean, obviously, you're in the middle of this football season, and Ohio State's got 4 games left in the regular season, and somewhat of a must-win situation all 4 weeks for them to achieve what everyone believed was their destiny before the season, to be the best team in the Big Ten and to put themselves in position to play in the playoff. The playoff rankings came out Tuesday night, and Ohio State was 10th. And I know I saw you were talking to the Kentucky and the Georgia people. Both those schools are ahead of Ohio State. So is Washington State. I think that all things being equal, I think a lot of years if people saw those rankings, they'd scratch their head and say, why is this that Kentucky and Washington State are ahead of Ohio State? Well, the answer this year is because the people ranking the teams have actually watched the games, because Ohio State's got one win that they can really kind of hang their hat on, which is Penn State. Everyone else is at 500 or below. I mean, you go through this list, it's not exactly murderer's row. Oregon State, Rutgers, TCU, Tulane. And then since Penn State, it's been Indiana, Minnesota, and then they lost to Purdue, a team that, loses the following week to fall back to 4-4. So, there's not a lot of meat on the bone, I think, for this Ohio State cause. And yet, having said that, if they can win this game against Nebraska, a 2-6 team, which isn't going to help the resume at all either, possibly a ranked team with Michigan State the following week. They've got a tough game with Maryland this week. And you wonder what the dynamics of that whole situation at Maryland with Coach Durkin being reinstated and then being kicked aside a day later, if that's going to – what kind of an energizing impact that could have on Maryland if they're going to come into that game and beat Michigan State, which has been so up and down this year. You can't rule that out. Then obviously you get further into this at Michigan State we talked about, and then, of course, Ohio State at Maryland and back home with Michigan. I mean, they're 7-1 now. This thing could end up anywhere from 9-3 to 11-1. You just don't know based on what we've seen so far. So, that kind of puts the football in a perspective that their destiny is in their own hands. But barring some type of major improvement from this open week, there's been nothing to indicate that this should be one of the top 4 teams at the end of the year.
Yeah, TCU would be the big letdown on the schedule, of course, coming off a team that won the Alamo Bowl, went to the Big 12 championship game, was expected to win 8 or 9 games, 8-4, 9-3, something in that range. Top 15 type team, and they've just imploded since then. So that's been the big letdown in the schedule. And then, of course, with the Purdue loss to Michigan State, you can also play that the other side. And of course, Michigan State's going to have one more quality win than some people expected because they beat Purdue. And of course, the Buckeyes have to travel to East Lansing. And you wonder if the Purdue game was 27-24 on a last-second field goal, and it's still a loss for the Buckeyes, where they would stack up in that top 10, because it had very much that Iowa feel to it in regards to just getting ambushed on the road against a team that's decent but not great.
Yeah, you make a very good point. They lost to Iowa by 31 last year, and that was what knocked them out. Of course, that was their second loss. I don't think there's been a team yet that's made this playoff with 2 losses. Ohio State currently has 1. But it's going to come down to a popularity contest if you get down to the end, particularly if Alabama, just as last year, loses somewhere along the way and doesn't win the SEC championship, and they end up with 1 loss, the committee will almost certainly put them in to the playoff with 1 loss regardless. And so, you think about this, is a 1-loss Oklahoma going to be better than a 1-loss Ohio State? Certainly Washington State's ahead of them now. I don't feel that Washington State is probably going to run the table, but again, I can't necessarily say Ohio State's going to run the table. Michigan, same situation. What's their status in this whole thing? Notre Dame, if somebody bumps them off, let's say it's a ranked team. They play Northwestern, Syracuse, I think here toward the end, USC, all right around 500, maybe a little above 500 in some cases. That loss is certainly going to be a better loss than Purdue. So, they weigh who did you beat, who did you lose to. I think who you beat should weigh more. And if Ohio State gets to the finish line and their 3 best wins are Penn State, Michigan State, Michigan, and then whoever comes out of the West, to which I presume whoever comes out of the West will be a ranked team at the end, Northwestern, Iowa, whoever it may be. Maybe that's 3 or 4 quality wins for Ohio State that puts them in. I don't know. But again, I'm tapping the brakes on the playoff talk. They got to play better football. They got to run the ball. They got to score touchdowns in the red zone. They can't give up big plays. They can't take terrible, terrible penalties. Roughing the punter, roughing the passer to extend drives against Purdue, which became touchdowns. Ohio State's defense, honestly, Mark, against Purdue, played really well for 3 quarters. And then I think they spit the bit in the 4th quarter because the offense left them for dead, couldn't punch the ball in the end zone. And in the 4th quarter, they gave up 2 40-yard passes for touchdowns and a 40-yard run. So after playing really well for 3 quarters, they reverted back to previous form, gave up those big plays. And now you're playing against Nebraska, a team that's got Adrian Martinez, Ozigbo, the other running back, then of Washington, and the 2 great wide receivers, Spielman and Stanley Morgan Jr. They've got big play capability on their side of the football this week. And so I'm wondering if we're in for another type shootout this week, or if Ohio State has made the proper improvement that they need to make, tackling, corralling big plays, that type of thing on defense. People will talk playoff with me, and I'm just going to flip it and turn it and say, no, got to play better football. Got to play better football.
Yeah, you can't control that playoff business. They're going to select whoever they're going to select. The only thing you can control is the next game, the next play, and it's all coach talk, and it's cliche, but it's exactly right. Yeah, it's fun to talk about the playoff, but you can if they were a healthy 7-1 that lost to a TCU team that was on its way to go 11-1, and that was far in the distance, and they were playing some great football, then you talk playoff a little bit. But man, Michigan, the way they look right now, my goodness. And it's even Michigan State, Nebraska, and Maryland before that that are certainly capable based on what we saw against Purdue, Minnesota, and Indiana. So the last thing you can leave us with, Steve, was, man, there are problems in the secondary. There's problem with the linebackers stopping the run and the pass. Offensive line issues we've been talking about for the past month. Was there any kind of anything stated in the news conference this week, or anybody have an interesting angle on any of that that would point to any of that getting fixed?
Well, it sounds like they're going to stay with the same offensive line, which, some people will be happy with, some will not. I think it's actually a pretty good offensive line that has done a good job in pass protection. I think the scheme that they've been asked to execute in terms of the running game has not been effective. When you're talking about a single back set and the quarterback is not a run threat, it really makes it much easier to defend. The quarterback, for all the yards that he's thrown for, there have only been 4 400-yard passing games in the history of Ohio State football, and Dwayne Haskins has 3 of them here in the last month. So it'll be interesting against Nebraska, which is down the line in terms of pass defense, somewhere in the 100s, I think, nationally in pass defense. He should throw for a lot of yards again this week. Whether it'll be 400 or not remains to be seen, but they've got to get the running game going, because when they have moved the ball between the 20s the last 2 games, once they've gotten inside the 20-yard line, they're 0 for 8 on touchdowns inside the 20-yard line. Settled for 3 or 4 field goals, stopped on downs a few times. So had a field goal or 2 miss, or at least 1 short field goal missed as well against Purdue. So they have got to do a better job of establishing the run and being able to run when they need to be able to run. If they need 4th and 1, you've got to convert that. You're at the 2-yard line, it's 2nd and goal. You need to put that ball in the end zone running the football. You're not always, as we saw, they threw 2 fades down there, and Purdue recovered and knocked both of them away, and then they tried to throw a screen pass to KJ Hill that was ill-fated on that 4th down play as well. So I think, again, the running game is probably the key to success for Ohio State, to knock down those big walls that are kind of holding them back from their potential right now. And I think that the thought is that they've worked very hard on it. during their open week. The good news is they should be rested. They played their 8th game in 8 weeks against Purdue, and they looked like a team on fumes that didn't have much to give, and that helped spell the loss in that game. So the open week should have helped them recharge their batteries and get ready. Mark, I think you come out Saturday against Nebraska, a team that's now playing its best football and has a confidence and a belief. Now, I know it was Minnesota, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. I know it was Bethune-Cookman, an FCS team that was only 4-4 coming in from the MEAC, but still they made plays. They did things the right way. They play with good passion, good technique, good pad level, everything else. And they've got explosive athletes. Just their defense hasn't been up to snuff. And I think that they're going to come in. They're 2-6. So like Purdue, they are a desperate team. They have to win the game, or there is no bowl game for Scott Frost in his first year. They have to win the next 4, honestly, to get to 6-6. So they're going to pull out every stop. If you thought Purdue with a fake field goal ahead 7-3 late in the first half was some daring move, again, I'm just aghast how that happened and how Ohio State allowed that to happen. But Nebraska is going to trump that card. Trust me, on Saturday, they're going to leave no stone unturned trying to pull out that win. And Ohio State better be ready to match, better quit feeling sorry for themselves and be ready to match that intensity.
It's always the best Ohio State football talk when we bring on Steve Helwig from Bucknuts. He's also a Big Ten senior writer at 247 Sports. Ohio State taking on Nebraska as an 18 or 19-point favorite, but don't talk to the Buckeyes about point spreads because we know what happens at times when you look at and listen to Vegas.
That line opened at 21 and has now been bet down to the 17 range. So some people I think Vegas or the public has jumped off the Ohio State bandwagon for right now. But, of course, that doesn't mean anything about the win-loss of the game. I think most people are of a mind that Ohio State will playing at home, but they've only lost 3 games in 7 years for Urban Meyer. The Purdue loss was the 4th Big Ten loss regular season in 7 years for Urban Meyer, 51-4. In the Big Ten, 45-3 at home. So all this talk about Urban Meyer that comes from other fans of other schools, all this concern, is he healthy? Did he do the right thing with Zach Smith or whatever? It's because he's beaten everybody's brains in for the last 6 or 7 years. There's a lot of resentment out there about the success Ohio State and Urban Meyer have had. So I think you see a lot of that sentiment spill out when his name comes up nationally.
And Steve, I'm sure you hear it 10 times, 1,000 times more than I do when Ohio State takes the one on the chin like they did, and you hear all the shots at Urban Meyer. 51-4 in the Big Ten, and it's like
that was the 4th one. Yeah,
90-9 or whatever the record is, something close to that overall. It's still ridiculous. So, all right, Steve Helwig from Bucknuts joining us as much as we can get him on here to talk Ohio State football. Steve, you enjoy your Halloween night. I know you've already taken in the festivities with the family, so you can hopefully kick back and enjoy some downtime.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Steve. Steve Helwig from Bucknuts. Got to join him there for the best in Ohio State football coverage. Of course, the Buckeyes have Penn State in their rearview mirror and Michigan up ahead. Those 2 teams get it on. It's become one of the best series, of course, and one of the most important series in the Big Ten. We've got Tim Aiden on the line from Black Shoe Diaries. And Tim, how you doing tonight? Let me see. We may have a bit of a mic issue. That might be on my end. Let me hang on. Hey, Tim, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
There you are.
Oh, I was going to say I'm doing good. Happy Halloween to you.
Happy Halloween to you as well. I want to make sure that everybody can hear you. It's extremely staticky. Do you want to jump out and come right back in?
Is this better?
Yeah, it's like really staticky.
I'll come back in.
Okay, let's do that. Watching Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Of course, we're here each and every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time talking college football like no one else with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. And of course, comments from myself as well. So the analysis comes from me as well. Previews and predictions that we will supply to SG1 Sports on the Big Ten and also the nation right here, Mark Rogers TV, and we'll be back throughout the weekend as well. Tim, let's see if we've got a better connection.
How's this?
Absolutely. There it is.
Now we're in business.
So we'll redo the Happy Halloween. Thanks so much for joining us, Tim.
Sure thing. And happy Halloween once again to you and everyone else watching this.
Absolutely. So right now, Penn State seems to have fallen into a similar scenario as what we saw last year. Dropping a couple big games, they still have the opportunity to rally, make the record look good, get into a nice little bowl game and win that and finish in the top 10. And they're very close to the top 10 even now, gaining much respect for just the 1-point loss and then the other loss to Michigan State and then coming back and beating Iowa and somewhere in the 13 to 14 range, if I remember correctly, according to the college football playoff selection. And but it has to be a disappointment based on wanting to win that championship this year.
Well, certainly it felt like a little bit like deja vu from last season, although I would say the expectations going into this year weren't quite what they were last year. However, though, of course, I say that, knowing now that they had 8 minutes to go against Ohio State, they were up by 12 points and once again had one of their patented fourth quarter collapses. And then, excuse me. And then they follow that up, following a bye week of all things. It's one thing if it happened if they had to play Michigan State right after playing Ohio State, but they had a whole bye week to heal up, to work on those little things, as James Franklin said in his press conference after the Ohio State loss, to go from being great to elite. And then they come out against Michigan State and just, I know people focus on, the game-winning catch by Felton Davis, but it should have never even come down to that. I mean, Penn State's offense just looked completely out of whack. Trace McSorley had probably one of his worst games of his career. Nothing seemed to be going right for them. And on top of that, defensively, they were having some of the worst luck as far as recovering fumbles. They forced 4 fumbles in that game. None of them and they didn't recover any of them. And there were a couple. There was one, I think they were up 7. Penn State up 7-0 early on. Michigan State was driving. I think after they had converted a successful fake punt on 4th down from midfield. So driving and they fumble like near the goal line, and it seemed like maybe Penn State came up with it, but they didn't. And then what also cost them too is bad penalties, ill-timed penalties. I think CJ Thorpe got a unsportsmanlike penalty on that same drive after a 3rd down and goal stop, which forced a 4th and goal situation from the 1 and would have made things interesting there, but gave them a fresh set of downs and then they scored. It was just just missed opportunities like that the whole game. And once again, their inability to close out bit them in the behind. They actually got the ball back with less than 2 minutes to go, and all they needed was 1 first down really to end the game, and they couldn't even do that. And so, it did feel like deja vu. They once again, there are a couple of teams that they led in the 4th quarter, Ohio State and Michigan State, couldn't put them away. And within a few weeks, they went from maybe overachieving and being right in the playoff hunt still to, they're out of it now and just, trying to get back to a decent bowl game, which I would say after last week, I'm feeling more optimistic about such a scenario.
Yeah, if they can do something, obviously, against Michigan, who's very respected right now as the number 5 team in the country, that would really boost their, again, they quote unquote can't compete for a championship unless the unforeseen happens, because they lose the tiebreakers to at least to Ohio State at this point, and Michigan State, although they're really not in it either. It's a kind of an Ohio State-Michigan deal. But if they beat Michigan, they play themselves back into a really prime New Year's 6 kind of situation. And even if they lose this game and play respectable and finish out at 9-3. It should be a good bowl showing for Penn State and an opportunity to once again finish in the top 10 in the nation. Trace McSorley has a special place in the hearts of Penn State fans and a special place in the history of Penn State football based on everything he's accomplished. I was putting together a video last week previewing the Iowa game, and just to compile his career stats, I took a look at the page, and with the rushing numbers, scoring, with the TDs, he's closing in on 100 touchdowns in his career at Penn State. It's pretty phenomenal. Just give us your thoughts about the season he's had, because you look at the completion percentage, you think, okay, he's not having a great year. I know that a lot of dropped passes have played into that, but also not getting the ball really placed in his hands on a passing play against Ohio State on a 4th and 5, where I would have done something different with him, maybe rolled him out, given him a pass run option. But anyway, obviously that call gained much criticism. And then considering what he was able to pull off this past weekend and winning that game, and the statement he made about his dad and all of that, it's been a very emotional season for Trace McSorley. He wanted to go out a champion, regardless of having the official title as a champion. I think anyone that's watched the kid play football sees him as a champion and just a great quarterback and a great ambassador for the game of college football.
Well, no doubt. I think you said pretty much what's on my mind about him. I mean, he is gonna go down as maybe the greatest Penn State quarterback of all time. That may not necessarily be, because of his arm, or may not be putting up most gaudy stats this year. Although I would say a lot of that is mostly due to drops from his receivers this year, which unfortunately has become a problem and probably will be a problem for the remainder of this year. But hopefully it's something that gets fixed next year for when Tommy Stevens takes over. But I digress on that. But I think the Iowa game this past weekend just further cemented his legendary status, as you sort of touched on. He went down, I believe, in the second quarter at one point, and I was watching this on TV, but I mean, Beaver Stadium just sounded dead. Like you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's holding their collective breath. I'm sure even the Iowa fans in attendance were holding their collective breaths. I mean, even if you're, rooting against Penn State, I mean, you got to appreciate Trace McSorley, what he means to the game. So it was good though to see him, get back in there. And of course, yeah, you mentioned his dad coming over the railing and speaking to him. And that might be an iconic picture in Penn State lore when we look back upon this 5 years from now. But I'll tell you what even helps further cement his status though is when he came back in that early second half. It's a tie game, goes on a 51-yard touchdown run, and when people were wondering, oh, is he okay to play in that knee? He doesn't seem to be able to throw it with as much strength and zip as he was before the injury, and then he rips off that run, and everyone's thinking, okay, maybe you still got this. So it was just great to see him come back in there, and despite how ugly that injury looked. And I should say, shout out to Tommy Stevens. He showed why next year, even without Trace, I think those that are expecting a drop off at the quarterback position for Penn State are going to be in for a rude awakening, because he's probably got the better physical tools, if I'm being frank. But so he showed that with his running ability and also his ability to, throw crisp passes in the limited time he got.
Got Tim Maiden on the line from Black Shoe Diaries. It's the SB Nation platform for Penn State football. Of course, the Nittany Lions trying to stay relevant in the national conversation, much like they did last year, and running the table even after they were knocked out of the Eastern Division race, finished at 11-2, ranked in the top 10 in the country with a major bowl win over Washington. They're much in the same spot, taking on Michigan on the road. Of course, this one has swung in extreme ways the last 2 years, with Penn State bludgeoning Michigan in Happy Valley 42-13 last year. And strangely enough, it was a just thrashing in Ann Arbor 2 years ago that put, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but of course, James Franklin had gone 7-6 and 7-6, and I think with whatever it was at that point, like a 3-2 start, 4-2, whatever it was. Yeah, the record was very marginal his first 30 games, like 16-14, something in that range. And who would have thought it? We weren't thinking about Penn State being the best team in the Big Ten right then. We were thinking Ohio State's the best team in the Big Ten, and man, Penn State's got to play them, and albeit a number of other teams, and this is another marginal team, and man, they just got rolled by Michigan and lost to Pitt, who turned out to be an okay team, and all of a sudden, bam, here we are 2.5 football seasons later, and this team's finished in the top 10 2 consecutive years. They won a Fiesta Bowl, went to a Rose Bowl, won a Big Ten championship game, on their way to, regardless of what it plays out to be, 10-3, 11-2, and firmly in the mix of top echelon teams in recruiting. And it's just a different narrative for James Franklin. Even though it's been a bit of a disappointment with the losses, it's still on firm footing in regards to being a major player down the road.
Absolutely. And again, when you put it that way, it is incredible to sit back and think, 2 years ago. I remember I was, again, I think I rest to like personal life stuff, but I was at a friend. I was serving it as a groomsman at a friend's wedding the weekend of the Michigan game in 2016 when they were getting absolutely thrashed. And I just remember, I think it was maybe a half hour before the ceremony was starting. So we're doing that thing where we're hiding the bride and the groom from each other. So we're huddled in the basement of where the wedding was taking place. And I remembered, the game's coming on. So I remember just firing it up on my phone with the ESPN app. We're sitting there watching it, and seemed just like that. Michigan goes up 21-0. And I think at that point, the ceremony was about to start. Thank goodness, because I was done with that game already. And I later found out just how ugly it got. So I'm kind of glad I didn't see that. And of course, I was at Michigan. At Penn State last year when they played Michigan, and that was definitely quite the sight to see. Where Saquon Barkley, on the first series, within the first 3 plays, he, last second switches into the Wildcat spot and then fakes a handoff to Trace and cuts 69 yards for a touchdown opening drive. And then the next drive, he does it. He takes a pitch from Trace and races that one about 25, 30 yards to the end zone. So just like that, they're up 14-0. I know Michigan did mount a comeback, but then Trace scored a touchdown right before the half, and then second half was all Nittany Lions. That's where they went on to put up a uncanny for a Don Brown defense, 42 points. So
it's really not good news, Tim, for anybody in the Big Ten, but specifically the main players like Ohio State and Penn State, that Michigan may have figured things out. Jim Harbaugh's got a defense that's as good as any in the nation, and he's got a quarterback who, again, I'm going to say like McSorley, forget the numbers, and I'm not putting Shea Patterson in Trace McSorley's category as an all-time. He's got room to play, possibly. But for this particular season, he's doing what Harbaugh needs him to do, and he's playing extremely well. They're running the ball very well. The offensive line's much improved. And and this has been a Michigan team that's been much improved under Jim Harbaugh, but lost most of the big games. And now they're on this revenge tour, and Penn State's next up for them. What are you expecting in this one?
Well, I don't expect Penn State to put up 42 points this time. However, I do think they have they still have the capability to give them some fits if the receivers can get over their case of certain receivers can get over their case of the drops. Especially DeAndre Tompkins, who was one of the more veteran receivers in the team, 5th-year senior. He actually had a pretty nice bounce back game against Iowa last week, 5 catches for 59 yards, and he's one of the receivers who's been plagued with drops all season long. So if he can have another performance like that this week, and more importantly, they need to be able to get the ball in space to guys like KJ Hamler. Let him create. get something on a short intermediate route and let him try to work some magic. And also they're going to have to land a couple deep balls on him, because this is not a Michigan defense that you're going to be able to, if they try and just run trace or run Miles Sanders between the tackles, they're going to get stuffed. They've got to find a way to keep that Michigan defense on its heels, which is easier said than done. And Don Brown stated countless times over the past week, at least, how much that giving up 42 points to Penn State last year bothered him. Now he's had this game circled on his calendar. So, I mean, you can bet he's relaying that message to his defensive unit, and they're sure as heck going to be ready to try and shut down Penn State's offense. But I guess switching over to the other side of the ball, I think all the talk about Michigan's defense, Penn State's defense has actually stepped up quite nicely in the last couple of weeks, especially against Iowa. Yetur Gross-Matos, I think it's named Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week. He had 9 tackles, 2 sacks, and I think 4 tackles for losses. But he just looked – I mean, he looked like a guy who – watching the game last weekend, it looked like the light finally came on for him. And I think you're gonna start hearing his name on a weekly basis going forward. He was a highly touted recruit when he came in last year as a freshman. Played a little bit as a freshman. This year he was seeing more playing time as a sophomore. And now midway through his sophomore season, he comes out of a game like last week against Iowa, and he's kind of becoming that de facto leader of the defensive line, it seems. So him, and also shout out to the linebackers. I mean, Jan Johnson and Cam Brown especially stepped up. Made some nice hits. Trying to, it didn't allow Iowa's running game to get going. And they've had issues earlier in the season for most of the season with allowing opposing running backs. Like I can remember Pitt for at least one half, they got Kadri Allison running all over them. And then same with Illinois. They were able to run the ball for a good 2.5 quarters before it got together. But from the very beginning, they were able to keep Iowa in check. Now, granted, Iowa didn't have a very good running game coming into it, but this is a team that had struggled at times against the run this year. So it was nice to see them step up. And for once, thank goodness, somebody on defense made a clutch play in the fourth quarter. Nick Scott coming up with a big interception with 3 minutes to go when Iowa, I think inside the 5-yard line, looking like they're about to get the go-ahead touchdown and extra point. And then it seemed like there was a miscommunication between Nate Stanley and Noah Fint and his intended target. Or I guess they weren't ready to snap the ball. I don't know what it was, but severe miscommunication. Scott read it. Scott saw that perfectly, made the pick. Heck, he probably would have had a pick 6 if he had kept his balance, because there was nobody in front of him, it seemed. But
yeah, it was a play that cost me quite a bit of money, but that's another story. But yeah, I was looking at the Penn State defensive stats, and not just the basic stats, but the more in-depth advanced metrics. And I think sometimes teams, especially teams in the spotlight, get tagged with a certain storyline or narrative early in the season. So App State, of course, was running that defense all over the field. And people were telling me, and certainly it looked from that one game, oh, the Penn State defense isn't that good this year. And we knew that you lost some players, in particular Marcus Allen from the secondary and some other guys as well. And it was my thought after that, oh, this Penn State defense is going to be Penn State edition that's going to have to outscore everyone. Well, in looking at the advanced metrics, the numbers aren't great. They're okay in terms of, yards per game and that sort of thing. But if you look at like sacks, tackles for loss, if you look at red zone defense, if you look at yards per play, some of the stats are really Penn State's in the top 20 to 25 in the nation in some of the more advanced metrics defensively.
Well, certainly. And if you look at, I'm actually pulling up one of my Black Shoe Diaries colleagues, Carrie Green. She does a weekly stat column called Just the Stats, where she puts Penn State's stats against, the opponents. So things like, for example, like rushing offense versus rushing defense, like Penn State's rushing offense versus rushing defense, and they compare national ranks, and then depending on how significant, so if there's a difference if the rank difference is 25 or greater, it's one advantage. There's usually a symbol of the logos of the teams, but it's like one logo means there's a greater than 25 rank advantage. Two of them is 50 ranks higher, and 3 is 75, and so on. So I'm looking at the thing with going up against Michigan, and I noticed, rush offense to push, pass offense against pass defense. That's big advantage to Michigan. But I'm looking at things like red zone defense. As you mentioned, they're 14th. They're tied for 14th. So, and Michigan's red zone offense, they only ranked 65th. So that's actually something that you might want to watch on Saturday. How does that Michigan offense, when they're in the red zone especially, are they able to finish the drives in the end zone, or are they going to have to settle for field goals? That's the thing too. If Penn and my colleague Patrick Kerbler on the Black Shoe Diaries podcast, Black Shoes Basic Podcast, good listen if you're interested. But he mentioned on the latest podcast that they went into that bend but don't break mode against Iowa, and they held up. So it'll be interesting to see if they can do the same with Michigan. Hold them to field goal, because if you can keep them giving field goals, keep them out of the end zone, you give yourself a chance to maybe steal this one at the end of the game.
All right, Tim Aiden from Black Shoe Diaries. You got to check him out and the rest of the staff there talking Penn State football at blackshoediaries.com on the SB Nation platform for Penn State. I'm guessing that you guys will get together on Friday and release your predictions.
We will, yes.
And of course, I'll have my predictions right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football in the entire nation, the top 25, including Michigan, Penn State. I will have, because I'm contractually obligated, a preview over on SG1 Sports and prediction on Penn State and Michigan. And then back here, I got to release something. So you find folks here that just watch this channel and don't go over to SG1 Sports and try to look through all those videos. I got to talk about Michigan, Penn State here as well. And of course, we could do no better than get the full Penn State rundown right here from Tim. So we appreciate you stopping by, Tim. Enjoy the game, and hopefully Penn State can finish out strong.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mark.
All right, everyone. I will stick around for a couple minutes and take a phone call or two if you'd like. Otherwise, I'm going to pack it in for the night and have so much to bring you. I have promised SG1 Sports a Penn State Michigan preview and prediction. Also, I believe Northwestern Notre Dame, and I'm on the line. I'm on the hook for another preview and prediction to supply SD1 Sports. And I want to preview all these games here because this will be something we need to deliver for you. Would be Alabama, LSU, Michigan, Penn State, Kentucky, Georgia, Stanford, Washington, as many games as I can get to. Although I'm running on fumes right now after about 2 hours sleep last night because it was a long night at work, and then I turned it around for a 7 a.m. wake-up call. So I will get as many previews and predictions out as I possibly can, and I want to be back here on Friday night because it may not sound sexy, it may not sound glamorous, but Virginia Pitt for first place in the ACC Coastal, for the right to, if they take care of business, to play Clemson in the ACC championship game. Or think about this, ACC fans. If Boston College beats Clemson head-to-head, for the right to play Boston College. How about a nice, nifty Boston College Pitt ACC championship game? How would that hit everyone? All right. 860-325-3687. I'll give you my take on college football, of course. As Coconut Kane elaborated on earlier, he was going to dress as me for Halloween with a sign that says the top 25 that actually makes sense. So check out that video as well as our college football playoff predictions. I have not responded to the top 25 college football rankings I know that I should have done that, but just had too much going on. And I looked at them and I thought, that's pretty close to what I predicted. I don't have a whole lot to say about this. I can certainly go through the list and let you know what I think different teams need to do to get there to that Final Four. I released a video a few days ago that for you history buffs may find this interesting. I went back to 2014. I looked at the very first college football playoff selection release and tracked those teams through the season to see where they landed. The top 4 in the initial rankings, where did they land? Only one made it to the college football playoff. And so the teams that finally made the college football playoff, Florida State, Ohio State, Alabama, and Oregon, where were they in the first rankings? I'd like to do that for 2015, 16, and 17 as well. We'll see how it plays out the rest of the week. Certainly, we have time to do that heading into the weekend. 860-325-3687. Otherwise, I am going to sign off here in the next minute or so. Sign up for the newsletter. We came out of the gate strong in regards to signups that first week or two. It slowed down. I haven't talked about it much, but please sign up for the newsletter. Just send your email address to MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and you will get our weekly newsletter, The Voice of College Football. Speaking of which, I don't have much of a voice left. The Voice of College Football that comes your way each and every Monday with stats, trends, facts, my take and perspective on the college football weekend, and also a channel update as well. I appreciate you guys staying in the chat room. You can always name yourself. Navy Thomas said a few weeks ago, it's the best chat room in college football. And many of you agreed, but you can name yourself, and I will take that to the bank, and I will proclaim that as much as I proclaim Voice of College Football is the great chat room that you guys have here with Sense of Tumor saying Bama wins this thing 52-17. I might take the under, especially in the Bama side there. I know that Alabama could have scored 80 on Louisville and on Ole Miss, but on 52 on LSU might be a bit much for my blood. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us again. I am going to be going crazy previewing and predicting all the games in Week 10. I can't believe how many good games there are this week. Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Kentucky. Yes, Pitt, Virginia, Friday night. I'm getting excited for Pitt, Virginia for first place in the ACC Coastal Division. Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Texas, West Virginia, Stanford, Washington, Northwestern, Notre Dame, Iowa, Purdue. Tons of great games in store for all of us coming up this weekend. So stay tuned for all the previews and predictions and everything I can possibly supply for the next few days. We'll be back live Friday at noon Eastern time over on SG1 Sports. And also I'll be live Friday night because I've got to talk some instant analysis on Pitt and West Virginia. So we appreciate you guys. And of course, if you shop on Amazon, grab one of the links down in the description section and shop on Amazon. Don't need to purchase the product. Buy whatever you want on Amazon. Just do your regular shopping. Just enter the site using one of the links below. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We appreciate the support, and we will see you soon.